If I just say boom, boom, bam, a bunch of... oh, a bunch of nerds. All right. Anyways, we're here. We're live.
Indeed. All right. So, yes, we got one person, two. All right.
Two people watching.
We are watching us.
Yay.
So, by way of introduction, of course, from left to right across your computer screen, we
Phone,
have...
tablet. You got it.
Whatever. We have Christian H., Mr. Hawaiian Sugar in the flesh himself.
Hey, guys.
I guess we don't get applause today, huh?
Well, I'm trying to figure
Yeah,
everything out. This is Kiera's job.
We need our own sounders. He needs like a ukulele sounder. And then to my left over here, we got Mr. Junior Varsity, the
What's
cookie crumb
up?
assassin himself. Now you need a shotgun blast for your sounder. Yeah, yeah, that sounds better.
Reload.
And then of course I'm Pastor Tommy, the mad non-scientist.
The mad non-scientist, part-time, Pastor Tommy, prime-time, part-time.
The man of many nicknames.
Yeah, yeah. Well, two. So, I mean.
Pastor.
Yeah. Yeah. Pastor. There you go. There you go. I'm falling behind on these sounders and every stuff, trying to get these comments going, you know what I'm saying?
So of course tonight we will be welcoming in a special guest.
Yes.
So I got to get through this Starbucks and get this what do they call it, espresso shot to pass,
Yeah.
so I can actually speak tonight. What's up, Pastor John? Good to have you in tonight.
Yeah, we got my wife. My wife is here.
Yeah, congratulations, bro.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Pastor John is here. My brother is here. What's up, bro? Thanks for tuning in.
My sister tuned in, Mrs. Abigail.
Yeah, and then on YouTube we got Gail here and Familia Chechoncolos as well.
Yeah, we got my mom in the house.
Yeah.
We got some people getting dialed in. So, of course, as I said, we have a special guest tonight as we will be engaging in a semi-formal debate with Mr. J.D. Kane. And so we're going to bring him on here in just a few minutes, and then we're going to get into it. And so in the meantime, we will continue to talk about meaningless chatter while Mr. Cookie Crumb Assassin here gets everything dialed in on his smartphone.
Yeah.
But
see, this is why we need multiple people.
But at any rate, so yeah, we're gonna engage in a semi-formal debate. So I just want to put it out there right now that if I don't fare well tonight, then I want to challenge J.D. Kane to a beauty contest because because I think I can win that contest. And as you can see, I have no monitors in front of me, so I won't be able to see JD. I don't have the live screen. I'll only be able to listen to him because I refuse to allow his hipster beard to be a distraction or to distract from the arguments tonight. And so I will not tolerate any red beard herrings.
Red beard herrings?
Yeah.
Real creative there.
Very
I like
nice.
what you did there. That's fake.
Full disclosure, I thought about that on the drive over here tonight.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did you put that little quip together?
Yeah. I didn't write it down or anything. I thought about that. So anyways, yeah.
Good for you for retaining that. That's pretty good.
Yeah. You like that?
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and so at any
Oh,
rate,
we got your sister in here, your sister-in-law as well. Abigail's tuned in.
we've already done that.
Did
bro.
you?
Nice.
Just leave me alone, all right?
We can double down on it. It's cool,
Look,
bro.
all right, I'm just go away.
I've-
We got Harry, brother Harry.
Hey, what's up, brother Harry? Good to have you in, bro.
He commented. I don't see his comment in here though.
Maybe Christian can get it on his side.
What I do?
Messed this whole thing up. Anyway, no, I didn't. Here we go. Oh, he commented on an old one.
I
Silly
see.
me.
I saw
Silly.
that he said he was going to come and watch the broadcast tonight, or he accepted the event invitation, or
Very cool.
however that works exactly. And so,
So what's up, guys? Welcome back. You know we're here.
did you just say guys?
Guys, what's up, guys? I got glasses on, so I got to talk like this now.
Yeah. Your voice definitely has to go up an octave when you put glasses on.
Yeah, that's the thing. They sign you up, right? When you sign up for glasses, they're like, okay, you can't talk with a deep voice anymore.
Yeah, I'm gonna start a formal resistance against the high voice glasses. For the lack of a sophisticated way of explaining it, I will continue to use my normal voice and wear glasses.
Yeah. Wear glasses and use normal voices. Brother Christian, what are you doing over there, man? Super silent, leaving all the talking to the people that sound like crazy people.
Just getting ready.
My wife
excited.
says I talk too much, so you need to pick up the slack.
Yeah.
Just pretty excited.
Yeah.
Let's do it, yeah.
Get to it. We got a couple minutes before we got to call JD.
Okay.
I told him we'd call him at 7:40-ish.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're just tuning in, we appreciate you tuning in. Put the word out on the social media airwaves that we are live. If you're on Facebook, you can send an invitation out to everybody on your friends list. We'd appreciate it. Like the video, share the video, invite people. Also on YouTube, I'm not sure exactly how the YouTube invitation thing works. But
You gotta click the link and share. I'm gonna share this again just in case it didn't get out the first time.
All right, so Mr. Joseph is still trying to get it out tonight, and so we're gonna pick it up and we're gonna fire off the broadcast here real soon. Darlene, Sister Darlene just tuned in. What's up?
You seen that from all the way over there? Look at you.
Yeah. So, yeah, no applause? Dude, you're like...
Oh, yeah, no, man. I'm telling you, this is like I'm not used to... I gotta get back in the swing of things, man.
Clearly, you cannot multitask.
No, I'm, you know.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
Far out.
There you go. That's to make up for the ones that I miss later.
Just get them all out.
All right. Let's see here. Gotta switch between this one and... Good. All right, you ready to call JD? Or
Let's do it.
let's do. All right, let me see if I can remember how to do this. Boom, boom, bum, bum, bum. I thought this was open. Apparently, it was not. Anyways, you guys continue to create small chatter while I fail at being the tech guy again.
You got it, bro. You got it. And so, of course, we don't have a formal topic for the debate as we're doing semi-formal tonight. It's real generic Christian theism over and against philosophical naturalism. And so when we get JD on the line here in just a moment, our semi-formal moderator, still working on getting the espresso to pass here.
Yeah.
I think.
Let the call begin.
Sure.
All right, here we go.
Is that how it sounds when you call, bro?
What's happening?
Hey, Mr. JD, what's up, bro?
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Doing good.
Trying to get you on the screen here so everybody can see you as well.
All right. Well, appreciate you participating tonight, accepting the invitation to participate, and we've been looking forward to it for, I suppose, about a week now. And where are you calling from, by the way? Can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry. Of course, my friend picks this time to start sending me texts. Dude, I'm normally in bed. What the heck? I'm over in Cincinnati area, around Ohio.
What time is it there? Is it about 9:30 or so?
It's late. It's way too late.
Yeah. So we appreciate. We're getting a feedback. Is that coming through your side? We got a loop going through here.
You guys are hearing yourselves?
Yeah. I think it's gone now.
Well, actually, no. It's because I turned the mic on. Let me go ahead and get some headphones in. That'll solve that problem. 1 second.
Sure.
Woo. Figure out how I'm doing this. So while we got this dead air, if you guys are watching now,
clearly many levels below professionals at this, so we appreciate your patience, JD. And of course, I'm going to push all the blame over here. I'm going to shift blame right on Mr. Varner.
Yeah. Welcome.
The cookie crumb assassin himself, and so all of our are his fault.
It seems like we went
After
away.
all.
I think we might have frozen on Facebook. It looks
To all
like.
of our viewers, the face,
Victoria.
everything has just went haywire.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Are we back?
Yeah, on Facebook, yeah. We've got the Skype going here. Our Facebook is freaking out.
Facebook?
Yeah.
It's not allowing the video to play on Facebook.
Really?
Well, I'm noticing my video is way behind what I'm actually doing.
Yeah, it's there's always a bit of a delay when we go through the broadcasting system.
Can we get Facebook up and going?
Michelle said it's frozen.
Let's
All
try.
right, bear with us, JD. We're going to try and get these technical problems
Well,
worked
I'm
out.
noticing my video is way behind what I'm actually doing.
Yeah, it's there's always a bit of a delay when we go through the. We still have some looping going on as well.
Creepy.
All right, bear with us, JD. We're going to try and get these technical problems worked
Well,
out.
I'm noticing looks like my video is way behind what I'm actually.
Oh my gosh, this is looping over and over.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
It might be the video call. We might have to just do audio.
Through the, we still have some looping going on as well.
All right, bear with us, JD. Well, I thought we had it going.
Yeah. Just started a new live broadcast.
Let us know if you're out there watching. Let us know if the feed is actually working. YouTube just froze up again too.
Did it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should.
All right, Jetty, let's just go. I'm going to go ahead and just cut the video, and we'll go audio, and maybe that'll reduce the amount that the computer's having to work.
Whoa.
All right, I'll give you a call back here in just a second.
All right, let's see if we can get the.
All right, we're gonna try this one more time. We're gonna redo our system here. All right, well, I think we're still going on YouTube. I can't tell. This has ended. I spent an hour doing this earlier. Okay, here we go. So, okay, can you hear us on Facebook?
All right, if you're out there watching on the Facebook feed, let us know if we're on and we're working.
Yeah.
I think we're back up. The YouTube is still frozen and locked up.
YouTube. All right, well, I'm going to cancel this YouTube live stream. Bear with us, folks. Here, we're having some technical difficulties here. We'll be back in just a second. I'm going to end the live stream and then restart it. I apologize for that.
All right.
All right, so we're going to...
Looks like YouTube is actually functioning now, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Video with JD.
That's so funny.
I wonder if that's why it stopped broadcasting. I don't know.
What do you mean?
Maybe we don't have the rights to use the Skype ringtone. I don't know.
You're gonna blame it on the ringtone?
Yeah. We'll
Hey guys.
Hey JD.
Hey JD. So 1 second, I'm making one last try to get my headphones working. Apparently the kids hid the good ones, so I'll be right back. Hopefully in a minute or two.
All right, no worries. Take your time. Load and clear.
I love it. Yeah.
All right, let's see here. So this live stream on YouTube has ended. So let's go back.
Ripping. Very good, bro.
All right, guys. I have to share the video again. So I've shared it like 3 times. We're gonna share it again just because we can.
YouTube?
Yeah, I got to get back on YouTube. Make sure it's going on YouTube. I think it is.
It is. It's actually working.
Is it?
Yeah.
Very nice. All right.
So as soon as JD gets back, if he gets his headphones straightened out, we can get rid of that audio loop. Then I think we'd be in business.
Yeah. I think at this point the audio.
Yeah. I think that's correct. Bear with us, guys. I know that this has got to be pretty grievous to put up with.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys tuned in
The first 10 minutes of his.
to what? Yeah. So maybe eventually we can eliminate all these technical issues, but that might entail a new tech guy.
Hey, sounds good. Sounds good. If he can do it better than me, good for him.
Yeah. No.
High five that fella.
That's jokes. No.
Right.
So we got to have the cookie crumb assassin shotgun go. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. Who do we got? We got brother.
All right, let's see if this works once I get them turned on.
All right.
right.
Nope, still looping. All right. We'll
I
wait for
don't think he has them on yet. Just if you're in a group that I've shared this to, and I've shared it to 3 times, it's because of the technical difficulties. Post it, share it, like it, love it.
Yeah, it's not an indication of any sort of desperation on our part to pull viewers in.
Yeah, no, it's
Exclusively technical.
Yeah,
Harry
yeah,
said
yeah.
audio's cutting in and out.
Who said that?
Harry.
The audio is cutting in and out.
Yeah.
Audio is
Actually, your audio is all coming in perfect.
Okay.
Is it?
Awesome.
Awesome.
All right, so we're not getting the audio loop anymore. So I'm assuming you got your headphones straightened out. Is that right?
No, it's just because you weren't talking when I did it. One sec.
Well played.
Yeah.
Christian can dance and sing. Kiera is unfortunately not going to be here with us tonight.
Oh yeah. Shout out to Sister Kiera,
Yeah,
who is missing in action tonight
I don't have a sounder for that.
for a good reason, by the way.
Yeah, it's not. She's not here because
You just do a double negative.
not
Mhm.
double knot. That's right. Tie my shoes.
Not. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. That's a good plan.
Buddy dance. Nah.
Yeah.
Go for it, brother Christian.
That's not happening.
Yo,
Get it.
let's do a dab session.
You know that could be taken really terribly because
A what?
a dab session.
Oh.
Yeah. I told you I refuse to dab because I'm not going to end up on some corny white dude dab montage on YouTube.
You should do a dab wave.
Dab wave. We're not dab waving.
How does that go?
I dab, you dab.
We all dab.
Oh.
Yay!
A dab wave. Is that a thing?
I hope
No.
not.
Huh?
I don't think so.
It
No.
probably is. There's
Yeah,
probably
we-
people in some place doing dab waves.
Yeah, we could make it a thing, but
No, we couldn't.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I've already made it clear that I refuse to participate,
Yes.
and so
All right.
at this point we're just waiting for JD to get the headphone situation straightened out. And by the way, I empathize with the headphone smuggling by the children because that has happened to me as well.
Yeah.
I have 6 children, and I have had my headphones smuggled.
Smuggle, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not somebody like if they would take them, like if they would smuggle them like neatly and care for them, but they don't. They like smuggle them and then chew on them and throw them and.
Yeah, and
you got
that's
one.
what Joe's kids do, and they're all teenagers.
My kids are not teenagers.
I'm just kidding. Yeah. So yeah, that's an indication that we have small children.
So Harry, the sound is you know we can fix that right now. It does mute before we talk. What it is it cuts the dead air out of the what do they call that, the white noise out of the background.
Is that a product of the software?
Yeah. So what it does is when we're not speaking, it will cut the white noise out in the background.
Go ahead, you're hoping.
What?
Dab on them, bro. Not today. Not today.
That's Christian's job.
Yeah, get him, Christian. Bam.
Oh!
Yeah, hold on. You got to do it
Yeah,
the other way.
it's almost working. One sec.
Sure.
No, it's pretty fun.
Pretty fun. Nobody saw it. You're half off the screen. Scoot over and do it again.
I'm good.
YouTube, we got 11 watching. Thanks for tuning in. Ba-doom. There's your song.
No.
No? She
No,
brought the
I want
guitar back here.
I want a different song.
Dang it.
He's
Yeah,
dead. Apparently, JD's disappointed as well in my song.
Yeah. Well, that. Oh. Yeah.
All right, let's see what we got here.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Little fuzzy.
Apparently,
Whoa.
That's on our end, I think. That's the software.
yeah, I should. Yeah, I have an excellent microphone, I know, so this should be fine.
All right. So are we dialed in now?
Yeah, I'm actually turn the volume down a little bit. There we go. All right, I think we're dialed in.
All right, awesome. So again, thanks for accepting the invitation to engage in this conversation. As we've indicated to our viewers already, that this is a semi-formal debate. Mr. Junior Varsiter here will be serving as the semi-formal moderator, and we will be laying down semi-formal debate rules here in just a second. But before we do that, if you don't mind, JD, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for our viewers' sake and for our sake, because this is the first time I've actually had the opportunity to speak to you, and I think as well for Mr. Junior Varsiter and Varsity and Hawaiian Sugar here to my right side. So personal, who is JD Kane?
Well, before I get into that, just real quick, do you have any rules about cursing on the show?
well, we do have a
not gratuitous, not gratuitous. Just I do a show that has a curse in the title. Not too bad. Just want to make sure it's okay on the show.
Yeah, we can just use the acronym TST. Will be fine.
Okay, you're aware of it then. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we have primarily a Christian audience, and so our preference, of course, is to edit, not to use cursing, and which you've exhibited that you have that particular skill, because I watched about half of your debate with G-Man this week. Mr. Joseph Varner here sent me the link to it, and I did not hear any cursing in that particular dialogue, and so so we would certainly appreciate you consenting to those terms. And again, you have exhibited the skill to make good on those particular terms. So if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course, not a problem. Although it's unfortunate you had your the first video you watched was my discussion with G-Man. I wouldn't call it debate. It was just so sad. Now my formal debate with Matt Slick, that was more interesting.
Oh, you debated Matt Slick. Okay.
Yeah, he was on my channel, or he was on my channel, or the guy who hosted it, named Positively Godless. But it was excellent. Apparently, I frustrated him so much he left, which kind of upset everyone. Then he came back for the last half.
Oh, nice! I wish I would have known about that. I would have made an attempt to listen to part of it.
Yeah, it's still on my channel. It was interesting. He just there's some question I asked him. Despite how politely I put it, he just was not having any. Like, I'm not answering that. How dare you?
Interesting. So
interesting fellow. I've had a number of talks with him. I've been on his show a few times as well.
Awesome. So so to rewind a little bit, did you have any more questions for us, by the way, before you tell everybody who JD Kane is?
No, I'm happy going in blind.
Okay.
I don't know you guys from Adam. But, and I'll find out as we go.
And vice versa. I tuned in a little bit as much as I could. Whenever I first, my first actual social media contact with you, of course, you dropped a comment on our message feed, something to the effect that you would destroy our argument if we had one, something about copious assertions with no justification, something like that. And so, of course, I invited you on the show then, and you suggested that we go on your show. Due to your greater viewership.
Did you invite them, by the way?
Huh? No, I never received an invitation to go on JD's show, but we are grateful that you condescended to our channel that has, what are we up to? How many?
I think we're still at 28, so if you could send a couple viewers our way. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Tell all of your people to subscribe to our channel.
Yeah.
I promise I will be spreading the news that I was on the show and have people look, and I'm sure you'll pick up some subscribers. Awesome. Not that I'm superior anyway. I'm at, I think, a little over 2,000, which means nothing when you look at how many the greats of YouTube have.
Yeah, of course. I have a good friend of mine who has like 5,000 or 6,000, and well, I'm
okay with our 28. All right.
Yeah, and our now that we have a YouTube channel and we only have 28, my friendship, my long-term friendship with that I was just mentioning with a gentleman that I know has now been compromised because he has so many viewers more than me, and I don't like it much. No, I'm just kidding. So, anyways, we will.
Well, if you've seen the G-Man debate, that guy has over 10,000. He should not have 3. So it's not really a good measure of quality. Like, I have lots of viewership, yes, and you're terrible. That's why they watch you.
Well, I have never spoken or met G-Man, but of course, G-Man is somebody that I would consider at least somewhat like-minded, as he's a believer in Jesus Christ, and so certainly as one of the brethren, I commend JD for his engagements online.
G-Man.
Even though I've never, I mean G-Man. What did I call him?
You commend JD.
Oh, okay. So, anyways, yeah. So, evidencing my lack of sophisticated thinking here. But anyways, at any rate, you don't have to go in blind. Joseph will lay out just some informal rules here in just a minute. But let's, for our viewers' sake again, and for our sake, because we don't know you, and I'll share a little bit about myself as well too, and we'll try to do it brief, and then we'll get into the discussion. But who is JD Kane?
Oh, well, I mean, there's not a whole lot to tell. Like I said, I live in the Cincinnati area. I've been here my whole life. Married and 3 children. I've been an atheist my whole life. at least a better way to put it would be the first time someone presented a God concept to me. It wasn't my parents. It was some person, I don't even remember who, and I thought it was silly, and that was kind of where I stayed for most of my life. Both my parents were atheists and just didn't teach me. It just wasn't a subject that ever came up. Somewhere around, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, I looked at a poll which said that, I'm sure everyone here has seen the poll, I think it was by Gallup, that said that close to half or a little under half of Americans are young Earth creationists. Now, until that point, I had always assumed that, of course, that was just some silly belief that, predated me by a long time. And to find out that not only is it still around, but it's around in great numbers, and in great numbers in America compared to other countries where it's much lower. I was instantly worried, like, oh God, science literacy, what has happened to our country? And so I started looking into it, and that led me to Facebook groups where I was an unconscionable jerk. I was awful. I was like so many young atheists, people who just like deconverted from one religion or another, who just really want to sick it to them. And I was like that for the first year or so, until I finally calmed down, got in contact with several philosophers, like people with actual degrees who like talk about this stuff, and honed down. Like, my reasoning was like crap. I was still at that point, I was still what I call a lack theist, a lack of belief atheist, which now I'm just repulsed by that guy. Like, oh, I was that stupid. No, there's lack of belief. Whoever says lack of belief, when you're talking about anything that you don't believe in, whoever says I lack a belief that cheese is tasty, no one does that except when they're doing religious discussions. And that, to me, made it very suspect once I thought it through. So I got, I think my arguments and thoughts on the subject were honed down and made more coherent. And especially when it came to presuppositionalism, which I understand you guys follow that particular
methodology, sure.
Theological bent. It's another one of those that, when Saitan, I've had a couple discussions with him, and when he first came on the scene, it did take everyone by surprise. Like, what is this? It's surprising. But again, like, this is another one of those things where, we're having a bunch of feedback there.
Yeah, it just cleared up. Go
there
ahead.
It goes. There we go. So again, just tapping the minds of some philosophers who, they've read Van Til and Clark, they've read Bonson, and so they knew what was going on, and talking it through, because everyone who has heard the argument felt there was something wrong. But it's just putting your finger on it is the difficult part, and that's where getting some really smart people together and having some chats on it is really worthwhile. And so I've been discussing that along with discussions with creationists, other evangelicals. My main focus, like so many atheists in America at least, is talking to evangelicals. We tend to have the Catholics and more liberal Protestants behind us going, yeah, this anti-science stuff is bad. But for the most part, that's my focus. If Islam ever comes to our country in great numbers, I'll start talking about that. Or Hinduism, or I don't know, take your pick of any belief that I don't think accurately describes the world we live in. So that's me. That's I started a show, as you mentioned, it's called TST. It's I'll say it the way G-Man does it. It's Talking Stuff Tuesday, except stuff is not the word.
Yeah.
Where it's actually, the show is actually kind of on a downturn right now, because its main focus was a place to vent about things in the community that have frustrated the secular and more liberal thinking members. The science literates, like would be a good way to put it. And so we do shows about G-Man and what thing he said, and there's other people in the community we talk about. And that's been going strong for about 4 or 5 years now. It's starting to die down because we've actually, some of them, we've had enough. Like, all right, we've gone over this territory 20 times. It's 20,000 times. It's time to move on. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm slowly give the G+ is about to explode and die. I'm moving back over to Facebook.
Yeah.
And that's where I'll stay. I'll probably minds.com, as some of my friends are moving there.
Awesome. Well,
that covers it.
My bio will be much more concise than yours, and so I'm married, of course, and I have 6 children, ranging in ages from 10 all the way down to 1 month old. And of course, I pastor a church here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm also a small business owner. I'm an electrical contractor, And so my time is pretty thin, and so as it sounds like yours is too. And so it's difficult to pull together enough time to do this sort of thing every week. And so I'm glad that I'm able to do so by the grace of God. And of course, I'm glad that you were able to pull the time together. And I know you're a couple hours later than us over there in Cincinnati, and so it's still relatively early here in Phoenix. And I know it's later there, and I'm sure you probably got to get up early tomorrow and that sort of thing. And so again, we're grateful for that. So that is me. Concisely stated, and so now I'm going to have Joseph Varner, our informal moderator, state the informal rules for our discussion tonight.
All right, JD, are you there?
Still here.
All right, the audio got weird, so I just wanted to make sure. All right, so as Pastor Tommy just said, I am the semi-formal moderator, and we're going to start this off by doing 10 to 15 minute opening statements from each of you. And then we will follow that up with 5 to 10 minute cross-examination rebuttals, alternating between the two of you. You'll get 2 turns each, and that will be followed by a 5-minute closing statement, 5 to 10 minute closing statement by each of you, and then we will have 2 questions apiece picked by myself for each of you that is opposed to your particular views, and we'll pull those straight from the live feed from either YouTube or Facebook. So before we get started, I want to thank everybody for tuning in at this point. I know a bunch of you just rolled in. I didn't get a chance to call you out individually. Thank you for tuning in and getting ready to watch. And then who do we want to go first? How are we gonna do that?
Well,
we got a coin?
Also really quick, I want to add to that. Well, I was going to add something, but it might have just flew away. But at any rate, since we don't have like a formal rebuttal, what we're going to do with the cross-examination, JD, is that you can use your time both to rebut and or ask questions during that time, and I'll do the same thing. And then, of course, we don't have like a specific topic for the debate, like the existence of God and that sort of thing. And so there's not really like an affirmative position. I think we're both affirming our particular worldview. And so I am doing my particular expression of theism, which is Christian theism. And of course, your particular expression of atheism, which is philosophical naturalism. And so if you're okay with it, JD, I suppose I could start. And when we do the rebuttal process, you can go first. Or, well, how about this? I'll have the first word, and I'll give you the last word tonight on the closing statements, if that sounds fair to you. And then
yeah, that's fine. And
then we'll just get started. All right. So we ready to go?
Right, sounds good.
And so,
yeah.
Are you keeping time?
Yeah, I got the timer going. I'll set it for. I'll just set it for 15. If you end early, we'll just start over and.
Yeah, so your own discretion, in terms of, again, it's semi-formal, and so somewhere between 10 and 15 is where we like to try to keep it. And I don't want to do the reason why I want to try to keep it shorter is because I don't want to do like a 2-hour thing. Hopefully just over an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes would be great if we can kind of cap it there. Just for viewing purposes, when I see those 2-hour debates, it takes me about 5 or 6 or 7 sittings to actually get through them all the way through. So I'd like to have something a little bit more concise. And so with that, let me know when the time starts, and I'll begin.
All right. Go for it.
All right, so if you're viewing tonight, of course, tonight, as I've stated, I will be arguing in favor of Christian theism over and against the atheistic worldview of philosophical naturalism. Now, of course, this is JD's particular expression of atheism. Now, I'm in terms of that particular expression of atheism, my arguments tonight they're not necessarily isolated to that. I mean, whatever expression of atheism you want to talk about, I think that for the most part they're just distinguished by emphasis more than anything. So I think that the arguments that I'll present tonight would apply to any particular expression of atheism. But since JD is a philosophical naturalist, I will use that particular label, and since he has applied it to himself, I will apply it to him as well. And so, as a presuppositionalist, it is of course my claim that the Christian worldview is in fact the only worldview that does not make nonsense out of human experience. Of course, JD knows that because of his familiarity with presuppositionalism. And so my intention is to demonstrate that through 2 lines of argument. First of all, we have the presuppositional conflict. And secondly, My second argument will entail the claim that the Christian worldview is the transcendental necessity for intelligible human experience. Now, JD, of course, dismisses this particular methodology based on what I believe to be a lack of perceptive philosophical understanding concerning it, as well as concerning his own particular worldview. And so my opening remarks, with my opening remarks, I want to demonstrate the circular character of philosophical naturalism, which, of course, JD staunchly denies, showing that his worldview, and my aim is to show that his worldview has the character of a presupposition rather than something that he can scientifically or rationally demonstrate. Now, philosophical naturalism, it is claimed that it is the quote-unquote scientific understanding of reality. And so, of course, I take issue with the idea that somehow the atheistic worldview or the worldview of philosophical naturalism is science-based, and that Christianity is faith-based. Of course, when people make that claim, they import their own understanding and definition of faith and that sort of thing. As a believer in Jesus Christ by the grace of God, I would argue that faith in the Christian God is in fact the foundation for reasoning, for any reasoning whatsoever. And so philosophical naturalism, of course, quote-unquote scientific understanding of reality, they affirm many propositions as true, including, I'm going to name a few, and of course I pulled these from Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and so if JD takes an issue with any of these particular propositions, he can say so in his cross-examination time. But I think they're doing my best here to faithfully represent his particular worldview perspective. And so first of all, these are the propositions maintained by the philosophical naturalist. There is an objective extramental universe shared by all rational observers. The universe is governed by uniform natural laws that make it orderly and comprehensible. Such orderly reality, can be discovered through scientific observation and experimentation. Nature is in principle rationally intelligible. Mental entities such as laws and values reduce to or emerge from neural activities in the brain. The universe itself is its own explanation of its existence and operations. Now, there might be a more sophisticated way to state that. Maybe the explanation of the universe is immanent. You might say it's self-contained. Its explanation is found within itself. Nature operates as an impersonal blind force, acting according to fixed laws with no purpose. Complex things such as minds and living organisms are composed of simpler constituents that are reducible to ultimate particles obeying physical laws. Reason itself is the product of an impersonal, undesigned process with no intrinsic relation to truth. Yet, of course, naturalism is claimed to be true. And then lastly, and of course there are more propositions that are affirmed, but I think this is, it's not completely exhaustive, but I think this was a decent sample size. And so I will conclude these particular propositions by saying all things are either physical in nature or else depend upon or emerge from physical entities. And I believe I heard JD mention that he does believe in some sort of view of emergent properties and that sort of thing. And so while the first four of these particular claims are the necessary premises or axioms or presuppositions of natural science, the remainder consist of ontological claims about the world, which although they talk about the same physical entities that science deals with, they do not, as purely philosophical assertions, derive any authority from natural science. Now, the naturalist gives the appearance of scientific authority. In other words, that its assertions are scientifically demonstrable or demonstrable, but this is simply not the case. Even if we granted natural science the privileged position of an axiomatic starting point, which needs no rational justification, which I think would be granting too much, the problem is that any philosophy, such as philosophical naturalism, relying on natural science must itself justify those same scientific assumptions, or else that particular philosophy itself relies on mere assumptions. Now, JD has and may want to argue that that he does not need to do any such thing, that he can just pile up assumption upon assumption, but that is not at all acceptable philosophically. Now, the point I'm making is that the aforementioned propositions are either mere assumptions or else they require some sort of philosophical and or scientific demonstration. Now, I want to issue the challenge to JD tonight to offer such a demonstration, and I don't think he can. But such propositions, they're not something that I don't believe that JD, as I said, can rationally or scientifically demonstrate these things, but rather they are simply ontological assertions hiding behind the facade of scientific verbiage. Now, they rely on the philosophy of naturalism, which presents them as just so stories that defy disproof, but for which philosophical naturalism itself offers no direct scientific or rational demonstration that is independent of philosophical assertions. Now, these just so assertions appear scientific, but are really just pretentious attempts to hide behind naturalistic assumptions. For example, such claims as abiogenesis, which assumes that life can arise from unaided from non-life. Nature is without purpose. Mental entities reduced to the brain. Complex structures arise from fundamental particles. Reason comes from an impersonal, undesigned process. The universe has its own explanation within itself. All these claims rely on the blatant, undemonstrated philosophical assumption that, first of all, everything is merely physical, and secondly, no non-material intellectual agent exists to produce these observable effects. Now, hence then, naturalism argues if these higher effects occur, blind, impersonal, material nature must have somehow produced them, to which I would simply say, yeah, okay, only if you beg the question by assuming that naturalism is true in the first place. And of course, naturalism further argues that all things are physical or physically dependent, to which I would say again, yeah, okay, only if you beg the question by assuming that naturalism is true in the first place. And so you see, JD has not at all proven by empirical observation and logic his commitment to naturalism. He has assumed it in advance. And he will accept and reject all evidential or factual claims based on this controlling and unproven assumption, based on his worldview, which is presupposed. Now, this, of course, is circular reasoning in the extreme, which, of course, JD denies that he engages in with respect to his particular worldview. Now, the presuppositions of natural science, there's different ways of stating them, but I will just, since I'm the one arguing tonight, I will state them as, first of all, an extramental universe exists that is governed by natural laws, which can be discovered and understood by reason through using observation and experimentation. Now, while these are necessary in order for science to proceed, they are nonetheless clearly not facts that the scientific method itself can prove. Now, rather, these assertions are the undemonstrated intellectual foundations upon which the methodology of natural science rests. These are, in fact, philosophical assumptions. Now, the reason I say this is not to point up breaking news. Of course, we all know this. JD knows this. I know this. Many of our viewers know this. But the point is rather to demonstrate that while natural science necessarily operates on the principle that an extramental world really exists, and that the reason I point up the presuppositions of natural science is to demonstrate that while natural science necessarily operates on the principle that an extramental world really exists, it proceeds on that assumption and that we can directly observe it. Now, the principle, this principle, when combined with philosophical naturalism's physicalist, materialist assumption, plunges naturalism into an inescapable radical epistemological subjectivism from which it cannot be rescued. Now, allow me to explain this. Philosophical naturalism assumes an objective world outside of our minds. It assumes what you might call extramental realism, which is the philosophical claim that the physical world exists independently of our minds. And yet, its own materialist account of sense perception logically implies the conclusion that all we really know are the internal states of our brains. Why? Because the entire process of perception is assumed to entail exclusively material and physical components. And so this leads to the causal theory of perception, which means, for example, sight entails light coming from an external object hitting the retina in our eye, being conveyed through nerve impulses by the optic nerve to the occipital part of the brain, where it is naturally assumed that vision actually takes place. And so from this logical sequence follows the absurd but necessary inference that what is known is no longer the actual external object, but simply some neural pattern internal to the brain. Now, such an inference would appear to make natural science merely a description of the internal rules that govern brain states, and yet the existence of a real external world is presupposed in order to derive the very physical model whereby it necessarily follows that all we really know is internal brain states. And so, of course, this is radically incoherent in that it negates what it must assume in the first place. Now, naturalism assumes the principle of causality, since no realistic account of the extramental world can be given unless we presuppose, and I might add gratuitously, the external events somehow impact our sensory faculties so as to give an essentially accurate account of the external world. And yet naturalists are inherently weary of metaphysical principles. And of course, I would argue that the principle of causality itself is conceptual and metaphysical in character. But the point that I want to make, however, is to know that an external object somehow properly corresponds to the internal image in our brains, we must know directly both the image and the external object itself for purposes of comparison, which of course contradicts the logical consequence that all we directly know is the internal image. Now, let me say further that philosophical naturalism must also presume the validity of extramental physical laws and mechanisms in order to derive the biological description of the way the senses physically function, which too contradicts the logical consequence that all we directly know is changes inside the brain instead of extramental objects directly themselves. Now, all of this entails what I would call a radically subjective, and I would add to that an ongoing ambivalent epistemology wherein the philosophical naturalist has no basis for determining whether he really knows objects in the external world or if...
2 minutes.
Or if... Okay, let me get down the line here. Or if there even is an external world at all for that matter, or merely an image inside his head. If he follows the physiological optical pathway from an external object to the inside of his brain, he must deny direct knowledge of an external object and thus of the whole external world. Now, I'm trying to press on quickly here because I'm running out of time, but you got to let me get down to the end of the line here.
Yeah.
All right, but we're doing informal debate. So if JD does, or excuse me, if the philosophical naturalist and JD, since he's the one that's occupying that seat tonight, if he does not directly know the external world, how then, granting that on philosophical naturalism, that is, if it is even possible, does he develop a scientific model in the first place, one which assumes the knowability of the external world, which in conjunction with his naturalistic worldview leads to the negation of such knowledge of the external world in the first place? Now, JD may want to respond tonight by saying, well, that's just silly. I see, I see the tree outside my window, this sort of thing. I see the table in front of me. I'm directly experiencing it, etc. Now, I would agree that JD does actually see the tree outside his window. However, in terms of his own worldview, he has no warrant for assuming that the subject and the object in the knowledge transaction actually correspond to each other. Now, the implication is that in terms of his own worldview, the naturalist cannot even know that the external world exists at all, having no basis for the direct knowledge of it, and all his scientific knowledge appears to be merely the study of relationships of neural patterns inside the brain. Now, in the end, philosophical naturalism negates itself on its own terms and is not a workable worldview. It is utterly destructive of intelligible human experience and thus thoroughly irrational in character. Now, given that philosophical naturalism is actually based on so many assumptions, why do naturalists so firmly believe in its essential truth, complete with immense confidence that nothing spiritual or metaphysical exists? Now, the standard defense, of course, is that science has proven itself indirectly. It has proven the value of the naturalistic perspective because science works. It predicts experimental results, which actually happen. It makes tremendous progress in understanding the external world outside of our brains. Conversely, they claim that Christianity provides no empirically verifiable predictions. And so it must be pointed out, however, that we don't know if natural science actually works unless we can verify that the external world actually mirrors the claims of scientific progress. But philosophical naturalism merely assumes the existence of the world. Naturalism's inherently physicalist ontology necessarily leads to a radical subjectivism or subjective epistemology. Now, unless the naturalist assumes the world is extramental, all his proofs for naturalism cannot be known to apply to anything except his own brain states, which he can only know to exist by assuming that the external world exists in the first place. And so here we land again at circular reasoning in the extreme. Where am I at on time? JD, I'll stop here unless you would grant me another minute or two to sort of finish up.
Oh no, go ahead and finish up.
Okay, and so of course examples of this could be multiplied concerning the circular character of JD's worldview. For example, the implicit assertion that the human mind is a self-sufficient guide for true knowledge of the world apart from revelation. This, of course, JD has not at all proven by empirical observation and logic. Rather, it is the logical implication of his pre-commitment to naturalism. He just assumes it to be so. Now, of course, JD may appeal to some sort of common sense foundationalism. I know that he's an epistemological foundationalist, at least I think he is, which I would argue is completely arbitrary and further cannot provide an escape from the phenomenological problem at hand. And so that is, in terms of his worldview, common sense beliefs cannot be shown to correspond to reality in any objective way. Further, foundationalism in any form is predicated on the assumption of the self-sufficiency of the human mind, precluding the possibility or necessity of revelation at the outset. So the notion that JD has on the basis of any form of epistemological foundationalism has somehow, from fundamental axioms or properly basic beliefs, logically inferred and further has demonstrated the fundamental propositions of his naturalistic worldview to the vindication of it, to me, is just simply pretentious nonsense. Now, JD cannot demonstrate the truthfulness of his naturalistic worldview, but rather it has the character of a presupposition. He has presupposed it at the outset. Further, it must be pointed out that the presupposition of philosophical naturalism is, in fact, the negation of the Christian worldview. Thus, every criticism that JD wishes to make tonight against my worldview, whether it be calling into question the logical coherence or the scientific or historical accuracy of the Bible or the canonical details or whatever it may be, it will just be a reflection of what he has assumed to be the case at the outset, which is the negation of my worldview. His worldview, which is presupposed, precludes the possibility of my worldview. Now, of course, my worldview does the same exact thing with respect to his, and this then takes us back logically to the presuppositional conflict between our worldviews. And so the question tonight is can this conflict be resolved? I say yes, it can. Now, while philosophical naturalism makes nonsense out of human experience, as I believe I have demonstrated tonight, the Christian worldview is the transcendental necessity for intelligible human experience, and as such is the only worldview that can rationally account for the subject-object relationship and the knowledge transaction, that can account for reason, science, and morality, and so on and so forth. And so, you see, eventually, we have to get down to the presuppositional conflict and ask the question, whose presuppositions or whose worldview can rationally make sense of our disagreement in the first place? My claim is that mine can, JD's can't. And this, of course, brings me to the second part of my argument, which I'll state briefly tonight. And for the sake of sounding redundant, the Christian worldview is the transcendental necessity for intelligible human experience, and as such, it is the only worldview that can rationally make sense out of the subject-object relationship, reason, science, morality, or even, again, account for our disagreement or this debate in the first place tonight. Now, I know JD believes in the presence of order in the world, but as I have demonstrated, he has no warrant for doing so, for he cannot even, in terms of his own worldview, escape the radical subjectivism of his own brain states. Most certainly, JD will make various types of claims tonight which assume order in his human experience, logical claims, causal claims, moral claims, and he will proceed according to his naturalistic assumptions. However, in terms of his naturalistic worldview, he cannot justify such assumptions. Take the laws of logic, for example. I know JD is familiar with the arguments. What are the laws of logic? How are they justified in terms of the naturalistic worldview? He may say, and has said, I believe, well, they don't have to be justified. They're self-evident, self-verified, fundamental axioms, properly basic, whatever. But I would simply say, even if I granted him the premise, which I think would be granting too much, granted him that particular premise, I would still press him for an explanation concerning their abstract, universal, invariant, and necessary character. I do not believe we will hear an answer coming forth from JD tonight to this particular challenge. Now, the same problem could be posed for mathematical laws. JD, of course, has the same phenomenological problem concerning causal order. There are more problems. This is just the particular one that I have chosen to take up tonight. I could pose the question, what are scientific laws? How are they justified in terms of a naturalistic worldview? I would press him on that issue in the same manner. What about moral law? Is there an objective standard for morality? If so, how in terms of his worldview? If not, I would press him on the implications that would follow. Now, JD may elect tonight to be dismissive concerning the arguments I've made. Dismiss them as silly, that sort of thing. Dismiss the whole phenomenological problem altogether. That is my expectation. Now, this is not a moral indictment on JD's character or anything like that. I just don't think JD can surmount the problems that have been presented to him tonight. Now, as a Christian, I have answers to these questions. Now, they are simple Sunday school answers that JD does not like, nor will he accept given his presuppositions, but they nevertheless are answers that can metaphysically make sense out of the subject-object relationship, as well as logic and causal and moral order in our human experience. If JD asks me tonight to give an explanation to these problems, or to put forth an answer to these problems, I would gladly oblige in our cross-examination period. So to summarize then, as I conclude here, in terms of JD's naturalistic worldview, he cannot metaphysically make sense out of those things which we might refer to as the preconditions for the intelligibility of human experience. He can't, I can. Thus, his worldview, my claim is his worldview is destructive of human experience altogether, and as such is utterly irrational in character. And so, concluding comments, the truth is that JD cannot live in terms of his espoused worldview. Every time he assumes a real world outside of his mind that exhibits order, logical order, causal order, moral order, every appeal he makes to such order evidences that the world is not as he claims it to be, but rather is how God says it is. In other words, every time he assumes an objective order, an objective orderly world outside of his mind, and every appeal he makes to such order, he is borrowing from my worldview. That is, as I am compelled to say, evidence that in his heart of hearts he does in fact know God, but he suppresses this truth by means of unrighteousness. Now, what JD needs to do is own up to his createdness, bow before his creator and judge, and receive his forgiveness through Jesus Christ. Now, I often hear the question posed to unbelievers, well, what is it? What would it be that would persuade you to relinquish your belief or become a Christian? Now, I'm not going to pose that question tonight because the Bible answers that question for us. The regeneration of the Holy Spirit based on the gospel of Jesus Christ, that is in fact JD's only means of escape from intellectual futility and final judgment. And I have concluded. And JD, I apologize, I did not time myself at all, and so I thought that was going to go a little quicker than it did. But I'll pass it back over to the moderator.
All right.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right.
JD, you get about 45 minutes for your opening statement. I hope you're prepared for that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to be ceding a lot of time somewhere in there. All right. So, hey, go ahead, start the timer.
All right. Well, no, I got to get back to it. Do you have any, while I'm messing with my phone, do you have any points of clarification? I heard that in the G-Man debate. Any points of clarification that you would like to ask him? Not for argument, just for clarification on anything?
Not yet. We'll do that in the Q&A.
All right, sounds good. All right, and then I'll set the timer to 20, and if you don't hit it, you don't hit it. And if you do hit it, you go over it.
Where did I land at, by the way?
A lot.
So I'll probably be conceding a lot of time. I tend to go pretty fast.
All right, sounds good. Well, start the timer right now.
All right. So I've had, this is obviously not my first conversation with the presuppositionalist. I've had quite a few, and they all tend to go the same way, where I feel like I spend most of my time correcting misunderstandings and false statements rather than actually defending my position. I will say that in that 20 or 25 minutes that he spent there, Straw JD took a beating. He beat Straw JD to death. Straw JD is being buried in the ground, and now Straw JD is upset. Real JD is wondering who he's talking about. I'll just go down the list. Atheistic worldview, that's not really a thing. Atheism isn't really a worldview. I do believe we live in a godless cosmos, but that doesn't really influence much of my world. Most of my worldview involves, like, very simple things like I can learn through experience, stuff like that. That there is a world outside me. Real simple stuff that everyone just assumes. Most atheists are not philosophical naturalists. In fact, I've only met one. He was an actual PhD philosopher and a philosophical naturalist. And while I like his arguments, I'm not sure I'm willing to get on that boat entirely. He mentions that he's defending Christian theism, but not really. I'd say it's probably more close to like Reformed, evangelical, presuppositional, probably Southern Baptist in some version. There are quite a few denominations. Now, I won't go with the 4,000 or 5,000 number, but there are dozens of major ones. And honestly, the very fact that 66 books or more, depending on your denomination, can give such different interpretations of even core principles, like whether there's a Trinity or not. There's the buzzing sound again. Yeah. So anyway, so that to me is a good reason to suspect Christianity as a whole. I mean, obviously a God could make a book where people aren't really having problems interpreting it. Like everyone's got the same interpretation. I'm a philosophical naturalist. That's news to me. I was not aware of that, but I guess it's close. I mean, I'm a naturalist, or at least that's tentatively like most naturalists are. Like as soon as God shows up or fairies go and plant stuff in my garden, I'm gonna just assume that natural phenomena have natural causes. Philosophical naturalism is a scientific view of reality? Not really. Science follows methodological naturalism, which is, again, just the assumption that natural phenomena have natural causes. This is an understandable assumption because, well, it's kind of hard to test for invisible gnomes in your garden. When you plant flowers or you plant grass, you assume fertilizer, and you don't have to have deductive proof that gnomes were not involved with their magical dust. You just don't have to do that. You're like, okay, we're going to leave any supernatural stuff is just not on the table. The most we can say is that if supernatural stuff is responsible for something, the most we'll ever be able to say from a science point of view is like, we have no idea why this happened. Now, the things where we have no idea how it happened is shrinking every day, which is one of the reasons why I think presuppositionalism is starting to rear its head. Presup is very young. We're talking 50s before they started. And before that, it's all evidential. You have monuments to theology like Aquinas and Maimonides and Augustine, Kant. Kant is amazing. So we have all these great giants of thinking, but they were all evidentialists. And now we're throwing evidence out. Like we don't need that. We should just start with that and then not worry about it. Well, that's usually what you do right before you stop believing in the first place. That's where your need to believe kind of overwhelms everything else. Christianity, he says Christianity I say it's faith-based. Well, no, Christianity is usually both faith and fact-based. I don't think there's not a whole lot of fideists out there. I know a couple, but 90% of Christians, I should be more specific. 90% of Christian denominations have no issue with any current scientific theories, including Big Bang cosmology and evolutionary theory and abiogenesis. They have no problem. They just say that God's the one who lit the match paper that got it all started. I have no problem with that. I don't think it's true, but that part is relatively harmless. Am I a materialist? Yeah. Maybe. Again, these are tentative positions. I mean, the minute fairy godmother comes down and throws dust on me that makes me fly, okay, I'm not a materialist anymore. Naturalism claim. He mentioned naturalism claim to be true. Well, yeah, and I mean that's rather trivial thing. As far as physicalism, again, no, not really. I wouldn't really say I'm necessarily a physicalist. That seems a little too strict, but who knows? He mentions how science is this complicated thing. It's really not. Science is just learning from experience with some stricter rules to reduce human error. Basically, you bring other people in, you write down your stuff, other people get to check it. This is not complicated, not something you would have to fight unless you had some religious beliefs that were demanding that you have conflict with some of the ideas that they come up with. Let's see here. Yeah, he's talking about that. I have a number of assumptions like the external world or that I could learn from an experience, that these are not accepted philosophically. Well, actually, they kind of are. Doesn't seem to bother philosophers much. They once, like Hume, for instance, discovered the problem of induction. He's the father of induction. He basically pointed out that, yes, there's a problem, and then just moved on. He just recognized that there is, recognized also that, as far as he can tell, it's insoluble, and moved on. It's not like we're going to stop, forming inductive arguments. We just admit that, when it comes down to it, we have epistemic limitations where we can't justify induction without circular nonsense. And so we're just like, well, we're going to keep using it anyway, though. The ontological assertions, sure, if you want to call them that, but no one's hiding them. They're represented pretty heavily in the literature. Physicalism is not a presupposition or axiom of mine, nor is materialism, nor is naturalism. None of these are presuppositions. These are all conclusions from just my living in the world. I don't have deductive proofs for them, nor I don't think anyone other than a presuppositionalist would expect me to have deductive proofs for these. These are all inductive conclusions, which means they're subject to change, although honestly I think it's unlikely. In the history of the world, as the quip says, supernatural, there's no natural explanation that's been overturned by, a supernatural one. That just doesn't happen. If anything, the supernatural stuff is disappearing day by day. Or at this point, we're pretty much done with most of them except for a handful. Commitment to natural. What commitment to naturalism? I'm a naturalist tentatively. If God shows, I would love there to be a God that loves me. It's going to give me a happy place to live forever. Although, honestly, the idea of an infinite life does kind of scare the crap out of me. Like, oh my God, I get bored on a weekend. What am I going to do with eternity? But who knows? Maybe it'll be all awesome and wonderful. And that sounds great. And I wish that were true. But my wishes don't make things true. I just have to accept reality as I see it. And this is, as I see it, there aren't any gods in it. And so likely no afterlife as well. Although it's still possible there could be one. Let's see here. Presuppositions of science. What he mentions as presuppositions of science are actually just presuppositions of people. Humans have epistemic limitations. And we tend to just, people who haven't studied a lot of philosophy, they just tend to assume these things. And then again, you go to the philosophy papers and you look up Wittgenstein, and lo and behold, they're basically doing the same thing. They're just writing it down for saying, oh, these are all problems. We can't solve this. We don't know that there are external minds. We have to assume there's all these skeptical things. But in the end, these are all things people kind of assume, all right, like, yeah, I feels like I'm in an external world, but I can't justify that with a rational argument. It's I guess you call it, you can only come up with some kind of non-doxastic justification. You can't have a belief-based justification. Otherwise, you get infinity regresses, or you're appealing to something external, and the external is what you're trying to justify in the first place, which is the problem with presuppositionalists saying, well, hey, we can solve the problem because we have God who's external to us. Wait a minute. Well, you're in whether you call it vicious or virtuous, it ends up being circular. And if all circular argument and begging the question means is that your conclusion can be derived from one of your premises. So I have to ask, what's superior to saying something twice as opposed to saying it once? When your premise and conclusion are the same, like, okay, well, God exists and God exists. You could have just said it once, and I'd still say that's just an assertion. You just said the assertion twice. Anyway, so yeah, methodological estimate. Natural phenomena have natural causes. This seems rather mundane, doesn't it? The problem with supernatural claims is that they don't seem to occur. We could live in a universe where the supernatural is just an everyday occurrence, that, you walk down the street and a demon walks by, and you see some kind of shaman knock him out with a space laser. We have fiction that can document what the world could look like if the supernatural was like an ever-present, was a thing. We could live in a world like that, in which case science would be very different. We'd have other kinds of ways of trying to understand things that seem hard to understand, like all these magical things happening, but we don't live in that kind of world. It'd be cool. That would be awesome. Demons in the street, God come down like, you're awesome, but you're not. Make the world much more interesting, but sadly that doesn't seem the way. And of course, the biggest problem is that they're resistant to tests. How do you test for invisible, magical, undetectable gnomes in your garden making the grass grow? There's just no way to do that. No way to determine that, God made, well, I mean, you could actually rule out God making Adam and Eve, but then again, the machinations of religion will come up with all kinds of excuses for why we don't see evidence for it, but it's still true anyway. Let's see. The external world presupposed. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a properly basic belief for a reason. This is, again, one of those things that's well read, well put up in the literature. I'm not shaken up. This is not novel to me. This is not new ground. It's just kind of where philosophy has currently ended up. If you believe you've solved what is widely considered to be an insoluble problem, why are you talking to me? You should be publishing your work. Go win a Nobel. My God, if you could solve the problem of induction, Hume would roll over in his grave. But hey, you've got prizes and acclimates coming your way. Go publish the work. I've put this challenge to every presuppositionist I've ever spoken to. Show me the work. And that's when they say things, and this is particularly the Psi 10 clone presup version of this. Well, why should I tell you? You don't even know you're not a brain event, or some other nonsense, which honestly everyone knows is an evasion. I'm sure when they say it, they know they're evading the question. External world, this isn't a problem for philosophical naturalists. This is a problem for people. It's a problem. It's an unsolved problem in philosophy. It's likely going to stay that way. I noticed that in the entire diatribe they did, I heard no defense of Christianity at all. Nothing. No, like, the Bible says this and we can do no evidence at all, which, hey, precept, you're not going to present evidence, but it doesn't make it very convincing to others. It just, I say that, we have an account, but when you say account, all I'm really hearing is I have a story. Well, everyone has a story. Every religion has a story. You need to go beyond having a story. You need to go beyond a story that's even internally consistent, which Christianity is not. The Bible is just, how did Judas die? Well, we can make up a very unlikely explanation that, he hung himself and then later he rotted and fell over and then his guts fell out. But honestly, that to anyone who is not a Christian, that is just a really bad excuse for two different authors who did not know each other, did not expect their books to be put into the same big conglomeration, who basically had different theological things they want to tell their viewers, and they did not know or witness the real events. We're going off either hearsay or simply making up stuff because that's what they did back then. My mother's an English teacher. This might not make sense, but back when the Bible was written, there wasn't a clear delineation between fiction and nonfiction. I know that's a crazy idea to people in the modern era where it's obvious. You have different sections in the library, for God's sakes. But back then, it just wasn't the case because you didn't have stenographers. So a lot of people would make up stories, and it wasn't considered lying or fiction, as long as the stories seem to be what they think the character would have done, which is why many of the narratives of the different books of the Bible, Jesus is saying different things, doing different things. They had different ideas they wanted to present to their audience. None of them were witnesses to this stuff. That just kind of goes without saying at this point, unless you're in an evangelical seminary, in which case they're going to tell you, well, the Bible's God's word, so let's just assume it's all true. So like I said, no defense of Christianity whatsoever. He did conclude, therefore, boohoo naturalism, as naturalism is somehow self-refuting. But I didn't actually have an argument for that. I did hear things that we've all known for a while, that there are limitations to human reasoning. To make it simple, I am a human being. I am fallible. I have epistemic limitations. What did Dillahunty say? You pour clean water through a dirty filter, you're still going to get dirty water. A common retort to that is, oh, well, could God make it still clean? The fact that it's logically possible says nothing about whether it's the case. It's also possible that he could turn me into a pink unicorn tomorrow. Do I expect it to happen? Is that likely? Likely is the real issue here. Honestly, anyone wants to convince me God exists without showing the God, fine. Here's several unsolved mathematical problems in the literature. Tell me God obviously can solve them. He knows everything. So shoot him my way. Never going to happen because, the gods aren't real. He's right. Christianity makes no predictions. There is no the Christian model. Well, they don't really have a model. They have the book. And the book has stories, which different people get different stuff out of the stories. Different people think one is literal and one is, not. And some believe everything is literal, including the Psalms, which were clearly never meant to be literal. And every author who isn't clouded by bias has noticed that no, these were not meant to be taken literally. Like that common line, atheists, the whole one about atheists are fools. That was back then. There really weren't atheists like myself. There weren't people who believed in godless cosmoses. They were such a tiny minority. They didn't matter. They were referring to people who believed in other gods other than the quote unquote real God. He claimed that my reasoning is circular, and I have to chuckle at that because I hear that so often, and I've never said it myself. I've never presented a circular argument. I've never presented a justification for the foundations of reason. They're just there. I know quite simply I cannot justify them. I also, as far as I know, nobody can. Claiming that something external to myself justifies them, like God justifies them. Okay, well, you have to assume the external world did it. So you've already formed a circular argument. Don't do that. As my philosopher friend Ozzy says, I know that to justify would be circular. That's why I don't justify them. No one does. That's where we're left off. These are simply unsolved problems, and they're just things we're still going to assume them anyway. The fact that I can't prove with a deductive argument that there's an external world doesn't mean I'm going to pretend that it isn't there. Anyway, so it's like the idea that he has an account. You have a story. Everyone has a story. It just doesn't mean that much. You need actual arguments and evidence, and those were not presented, at least not yet. As far as the laws of logic, this is something I love this because Matt Slick went into great detail about it. By the way, his argument has been completely demolished by Alex Malpass. I love that guy, philosopher, PhD friend of mine. He did 2 hours trying to explain the difference between P and not P, and it was a mess. Anyway, that's a whole other thing and not really relevant to this. The laws of logic. Really, there are no laws of logic. They are the classical principles of logic that Aristotle, wrote down. He believes they're prescriptive. I think they're prescriptive too. But they're really just the most. They're like scientific laws. They're just really general observations about the way arguments are structured. That if you say, let's face it, you don't really need to write down that, hey, if I say something and then I say the opposite of it, they obviously can't both be true. You don't need to write that down. People knew that before he wrote them down. It just shows you the proper way to make an argument. So if you find out that you've contradicted yourself, like a logical contradiction, you're wrong. You should stop doing that. But they're really not that important. They're not special, transcendental, anythings. They're just general rules for arguments. The fact that things are the way they are and aren't the way they aren't is just intuitive and obvious. And well, why would something that simple need a justification? I don't think they do. And it seems the philosophers are with me on that. No, there's no philosophical argument I'm aware of that says, and here's why the laws of logic are the way they are, because God's mind. No, there's nothing in the Bible about logic. There are things where God is saying things that are logical, but saying a proposition that does not conclude a contradiction is not the law of non-contradiction. It's an example of someone not making a contradiction. Well, I like cheese does not entail logical contradiction. Have I just told you about the law of non-contradiction? No, I haven't. And God, if he wrote the Bible or not, or the human who wrote those passages or not, is not telling you about the classical principles of logic, because they really weren't. The Jews didn't have those. That was over there with the Greeks. They weren't really aware of them yet. Aristotle was only so popular. He claims that he's going to present an argument, and I won't accept it due to presuppositions. What presuppositions? I have no anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, anti-Buddhist, or Hindu. I don't have anti-religious presuppositions. I have conclusions about the world that basically say that all of them are nonsense. And I think a natural view of religion makes the most sense to me. I could be wrong. I think it's unlikely, though. I'm pretty certain that gods are not a thing. Deistic gods, honestly, are just not worth talking about till there's some kind of evidence that would go for or against. Whereas personal gods, like the Christian one, are just so obviously false to me. And I know that sounds kind of pompous, but I don't know how else to put it. The Bible is, to me, clearly a work of fiction. It reads like fiction. It contains far more elements of modern fiction than it does of modern nonfiction. It contains, and we've all heard the list before, cows being put up next to painted sticks, and they'll give birth to striped cows. Talking snakes, talking donkeys, people made from organs with magic or god powers, however you want to put it. This is what you expect in fiction. Everyone had an origin story back then. Before we knew anything about how the world really worked, religion was kind of, people just made stuff up because we hate not knowing. Being an atheist myself, I am unusual. I think it's because in the modern era, more of our people are having good, decent, safe lives with not nearly as many worries as they had back when we had subsistence living, back when people lived to 30. And so you didn't really need the comfort that came with religious beliefs or I have to admit, the social cohesion. You don't see a lot of good atheist churches bringing the atheists together to group up. We're like, as they say, is like herding cats. But as far as the truth of it, I think they're obviously pretty false. Pretty false is the word. They're just not true. The metaphysics of all religions are false. And Christianity is kind of blatantly that way. You read the book, you read the Ten Commandments, and it's quite clear that a person wrote it, not a god. A god would have a much better list. I know because I'm not that smart. Okay, actually I'm that smart, but I'm brilliant, in fact. But I can put myself in a God's shoes, say, here are the things I would do. And then I look at what God in the Bible did. I'm like, well, that's what I might do if I was 2,000 years old and didn't know anything about the world. I might say I'm going to stop the sun in the sky so Jericho could finish being wiped off the face of the earth. Or if it was me and I actually liked the people I created, I'd blink them out of existence. Just little things like that. And there's 1,000 of those little things all throughout the Bible. So just clearly a man-made book. As far as a defense of against precept, if you're not a Christian, you're not a Catholic, whatever, the easiest thing to know is that the claim that I'm suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. I think I'd be aware of that at some level. I'm not. And that's when you start off with a false claim, it kind of underlines that precept is not about, I am not a target here. No one is trying to convince me of anything, and anything even admitted as such. Precept is about maintaining the flock. And for that, well, honestly, it really doesn't work that well. There's not a whole lot of presuppositionalists out there. But that is definitely the goal. The goal is, here, you no longer have to argue evidence, which might make you doubt. Now you're just going to assume it's all true and then tell other people that they're all dummy heads for not believing you, which is really how it works out. You're suppressing the truth. You can't account for But when you account for something, you need to do more than just present the story. evidence, arguments, dense ones. Life is complicated. You're going to need to do a lot of work. And I feel like I do as much work as I can. And there's still lots of things that are unknown to me. I don't know if there was a beginning of the universe, or if there was something before it, or if that question even makes sense. I do know that Big Bang cosmology makes the most sense of anything that's out there. I do know, because we have supernovas going off, we're seeing light from supernovas, that we can even just use good old-fashioned geometry to determine they're older than 6,000 years old. We know the universe is older than that. We've measured radiometric dating does work, because if it didn't, all our nuclear reactors would be exploding right now. So we know these things work. Science has been an excellent tool, because science works with what we already use, which is just inductive reasoning, learning from experience. If you doubt your ability to learn from experience just because the Bible says a passage, I don't know how to argue with that. I mean, what do you say to someone who says, well, regardless of what the evidence says, I'm going to go with my Bible? Well, the Bible, you could say, is a piece of evidence. It has a list of claims, and you could check those claims, or just simply trust the authors and say, since this author says it, I trust it. And of course, precepts claim that God is the author, so I can see why you might want to trust him. But he gets so much wrong. All God would have to do is get one thing obviously wrong. And there's more than one thing in the Bible that's obviously wrong, that you check out in the world and like, okay, that is actually not the case at all. It's not even close. So, I mean, I think the last thing you mentioned was abiogenesis, which again is pretty mundane. I think we both agree that biological life originated somehow. He'll probably doubt some of the other evidence we have, which is, I would happily claim that I know that life originated naturally on the planet. I also know about when. It's the exact process that is in question, but there's really very little doubt as to that it was a natural process and it was on the early Earth. We have fossil evidence going back. We can see things getting simpler and simpler until finally you have this massive period in the lowest layers where it's single-celled only and sparse, and it stays that way until you get to the point where you don't see anything or see almost nothing, and that's where we think life originated. That makes sense. That's a strong, simple, easy inductive argument for what should be a mundane claim that life originated around that time. But if you are a young Earth creationist, you've got to deny that. You've got to believe there was a flood that left no apparent evidence. Ken Ham rather amusingly gets away with this with a non-scientific audience by saying things, by staying as general as possible. Like, well, if there was a flood, there'd be lots of dead things. And look, there's lots of dead things, and they're in the rocks, and that must have been the flood. Like, well, no, because the flood can't. Floods leave behind evidence. Global flood isn't going to leave special magical evidence. It's going to leave evidence like there was a giant flood. Floodwaters recede. They leave these kind of strips of land ripped off. We'd see all kind of graded bedding. There obviously be no chalk shelves. Chalk forms very, very slowly, and we know this because we can see the processes today to say that they were so much faster in the past despite no evidence of this. Well, that goes back to when you presuppose things, you end up making some rather nonsensical claims. I presuppose as little as possible. I am like most people in that what I presuppose is the minimum. I presuppose only the tools of reason, which brings me to my last point, which is presuppositionalism is, one, it's not an argument. Presuppositionalism is just the repetition of the position. I take God and Bible first, and then that justifies what would normally be my properly basic beliefs. Except God and the Bible are not an epistemology. And epistemology is your belief-forming tool set. It's things like, the assumption of an external world, the assumption that induction works, the assumption that your senses work. Yes, these are assumptions, but what else are we going to do? We're human beings. If I was a god, I wouldn't have to make those assumptions, but unfortunately, I'm not a god. So I will have to make these assumptions, and so does everyone else, as far as I know. If you believe you've solved this stuff, don't just tell me you've solved it because God solves it. That you publish that paper, you're not. It's going to get laughed at, and for good reason. You're going to actually show some work, and when I say that, I am as certain as I can be that there is no work to be shown. Anyway, I think that I'm not sure how long I went, but that kind of sums it up. I don't know what I can say to defend my own beliefs because, like I said, they're rather mundane. I accept a scientific reality. I think I wouldn't say scientific theories are true, but scientific theories are the closest approximation of the truth that anyone has. The likelihood that someone in Hoboken has just come up in a dream and has come up with a theory that is superior to and makes better predictions than, say, evolutionary theory is unlikely as to basically be absurd. Is it possible? I don't have a deductive proof. I have offered no deductive proofs here. It's all induction. It's all synthetic propositions. So the demand that I have an analytic proposition that proves that some synthetic argument is true is silly. It's not something you'd hear in a philosophy or logic class. So, like I said, I'm not sure what I can say to defend my beliefs because, like I said, they're just beliefs that we all share. I assume everyone here assumes that there's an external world. How you claim to justify that? Well, I would say stop trying to justify it. You're not. It's not going to end well. But regardless of whether you try to justify it or not, we all hold the same basic, properly basic beliefs. You obviously throw one more on there, God, Bible's inerrant, etc. That is a hell of a claim. On top of that, the impossibility of the contrary, there's just no way. The impossibility of the contrary doesn't mean that you show that my worldview is absurd or that the last 10 people you talk to have an absurd worldview. You have to show through an argument, not just an assertion that, since your worldview is true, others are not. You have to show that all those other worldviews lead to absurdity. And this includes, excuse me, not just my worldview, not just the last 100 worldviews you've heard, but every current and possible worldview that could ever exist. That is, as far as I know, a near infinite number. It's just not going to happen. There's no way to do it. I know Kent Hovind says it. He's an idiot. I don't know how else to put that. There's just no way to demonstrate, which is why the minute I put this in front of some philosopher friends of mine, it took them little time to take it apart. Now, my friend Ozzy did do a 3.5-hour video explaining all the faults in it, and he was way too charitable, and he is always very verbose. But really, he's also summed it up in 10 minutes. It's just, as far as worldviews go, it's not a good one. Or I should say, at least as far as epistemologies go, you can do what everyone else has done before 1950, and Van Til hit the scene and came up with this nonsense. Is that go with evidence? Evidence worked fine. If the evidence shows that a God exists, I will happily believe in the God. I'm pretty sure the evidence is going the other way, and it has been for a while. Anyway, I've repeated myself quite a bit now, so that kind of sums it up for me. I'm ready to move on to the next section. I will see whatever time I have left, if I have any. I have no idea how long I went.
Sure. What was this time in comparison?
About 45 minutes apiece, yeah. I think we're.
Oh, I'm looking at the time. There wasn't that long.
No, I stopped the timer at 15 and just let you go. Same thing I did for Pastor Tommy.
Yeah, I do think.
Yeah, I should have stopped earlier. I did a lot of repetition there, but sometimes it's important to repeat things a few times.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm just glad it was comparable, so I don't feel bad for for being long-winded.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. I am very verbose as well.
Yeah. So you said a bunch of interesting things here. So I guess we'll start the cross-examination / rebuttal.
Are we going to time that, or are we just going to go to town?
Yeah, I think at this time, I think we broke the timer at this point.
Yeah.
And so
we don't need to be that formal on that. We'll just go back and forth.
Sure. And so now then, I want to address a few things, and so we'll go back and forth here. I suppose I'll start. We'll continue to take turns, and then of course, as I said earlier, that you'll get the final word in the closing statements. But the idea that what I was representing was a straw man. Now, let me first of all say that the reason why I picked up on the notion of philosophical naturalism as your particular expression of atheism is because on TST, that's exactly what you said this past week. You said, I am a philosophical naturalist. Now, if I misheard you, you can go back and confirm or disconfirm my claim, but that is what you said. That's why I picked up on that. But I did preface that at the beginning of our discussion by saying that the arguments that I'm going to make are not arguments that apply exclusively to the atheistic expression of philosophical naturalism, but that they would apply to any particular expression of atheism. And I did say that as far as I'm concerned, the distinction between the different expressions of atheism is really one of emphasis more than anything else. And so you said that atheism is not a worldview. You didn't really give an explanation for why you think that is. I mean, I've heard that argument before, something about the lack of a belief. And you didn't define your atheism.
Well, do you want to start there? I could explain that.
Yeah. Let me finish the thought, and then I'll let you explain. And so, of course, I did not really go into any sort of discussion of explaining my particular view of Christian theism either. And so, granted, we both just sort of assumed a particular definition of our worldview. Now, I would assume what you mean by that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'll give you a minute to answer that. I don't know what your particular definition of atheism. You can define it. I don't know if you define it as a lack of belief in a God, or I thought I heard you in your discussion saying that you're not particularly fond of that particular view of atheism. That it's sort of like a lack of a belief.
Not fond is an understatement.
Okay, so yeah, so if you go, I'll give you a moment to go ahead and explain why you think or why you claim that atheism is not a worldview.
Well, I don't want to be too dogmatic about it because definitions are really what people mean. If people want to mean that they lack a belief, then that they're free to do that. Sure. I prefer the philosophy definition. that atheism is the belief that gods don't exist. Because let's face it, when you say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe gods exist versus I believe gods don't exist, you are in essence saying the same thing. You put it into propositional logic and you're saying the same thing. I believe that the proposition one or more gods exists is probably false. That's where my atheism goes. And as far as atheism, it would also include certainly false. Now, agnosticism, I would put in there with if you either I don't know, I have no idea, gee, I'm just confused. That would be an agnostic where you're just really unsure. And there's probably like a bit of leeway in there. It's really just about your confidence in the proposition. A theist obviously thinks it's probably true or certainly true. I think that's the best way to understand it because atheism themes they do go back and forth like that. So lack of belief, I hate that. Because atheists do have a burden of justification, and I think I've met that. I've explained my reasons for why I think gods don't exist, and of course theists have the burden too, and they explain why they believe. Usually, at least, I guess presuppers not so much, but evidentialists will explain why they believe that their particular god is the one that exists, and why other ones don't.
Sure. Now, just to follow up on that particular idea, now would you make the claim that you are I know you somewhat did sort of make this particular claim that you are an atheist, that you concluded that atheism is the proper take on reality based on some sort of an inductive principle, the principle of induction, scientific procedure, this sort of thing, and that you rationally concluded by the means, of course, of reason and logic that atheism is in fact that is true and theism is in fact false. And so is that an accurate representation of your claim?
The word choice is a little. Well, I would say that based on my experiences in life, that I've come to the conclusion, tentatively, and we're probably going to hold to it, that we live in a godless cosmos. That among the things that exist in reality, gods are not one among them, and that is just based on my experiences. And since my experiences are limited, there is the possibility I am wrong. Sure. Although I think it's very unlikely that I'll be wrong about the Christian God. The theistic gods are a bit more fuzzy. Who knows?
Sure. And how would you adjudicate between your experience and somebody else's experience? I mean, is that why you're just saying, my belief is tentative, or my particular conviction or knowledge claim is tentative? Because certainly we can't reduce our particular claims to our own experiences. There's got to be something to adjudicate between experiences. And so how would you explain that?
Well, you just compare. If you have any evidence to submit, you compare it. You compare your arguments if you have any of them. If there's a deductive proof, you compare those two to see if they're valid and not more importantly that they're sound. You compare the ideas. Like, well, if you think a God exists, why? Oh, well, you think gods don't exist. Why? And you just start answering that question.
On your particular view, does anything metaphysical exist?
I'm not even sure what that means.
Is there anything that's non-material?
Well, that would be metaphysic then. That would just be so something immaterial.
Well,
I don't know.
I boiled it down to something more to a more specific question to kind of get at the crux of what I'm asking for. But yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. As far as I can tell, materialism seems to be the case. It seems that everything that exists that we're aware of is either material or is coming from the material, like minds and thoughts and things. These are all. There's a term they use. I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. An emergent property of the material.
Right.
So things that are material are the things that come from the material, like brain states produce minds and consciousness, but they're still brain states.
So would your claim be that are you maintaining that such a thing as an emergent property, an immaterial entity, actually exists?
No, nothing immaterial exists. It all links back to the material.
Okay, all right. So I don't want to press on the emergent property thing because I don't think it's really important at this point. But let me go over a few other things that you said. This idea that presuppositionalism throws evidence out. Of course, I think this completely misunderstands the entire discussion with respect to our particular starting points. Now, can you let me ask the question this way? Can you demonstrate logically or scientifically that there's no metaphysical or that there's no particular metaphysical starting point or an immaterial personality that governs the world?
Oh, you mean can I prove with like a deductive argument that gods don't exist? No.
Okay, so fair enough. The idea of evidence, would you say that? Well, let me ask the question this way: what is facts and what is evidence? What is the nature of facts and evidence?
What is the nature of it? Well, evidence is anything put forth in favor of a proposition, and those are usually facts. They could be arguments as well if it's something deductive, but for if it's an analytic proposition. For synthetic propositions, we usually you make the proposition a rock is hard. That would be a fact, and that fact, but then that is evidence for, and then you lead to something else. That usually in science would be an evidence for a hypothesis or theory. So facts are easy. Facts are the easy stuff. It's there are a billion, trillion, quadrillion facts out there. The theories explain why those facts are facts, why those facts exist, and that's where the interesting stuff really happens.
Sure. Now, facts are facts something that are first interpreted by the mind of men?
Well, I mean, everything goes through the mind of men, right? I mean, we can't everything possible. All of our propositions, all of our ideas are existing in our minds as brain states. So yeah, that's kind of a trivial thing to say, but yeah, if we say something is a fact, that is a proposition that has to come from my mind. Whether it is actually the case is a different thing. It really comes down to the barrier between our minds and the external world. Assuming, of course, there is an external world. I do, like most people. There are some metaphysical. I lost the term, but people who actually believe that they're the only mind. I think that's kind of cute. But yeah, there's a barrier. That's where our senses come into play. There's a barrier between our minds and the external world, and we bridge that barrier with our senses.
Sure.
Could all our senses be going nuts? Sure. I don't see any reason to think it's the case, but then again, I can't prove that they are because that would require testing them, so I'm using them in the first place.
All right, so let me press on some of these points really quick. I just want to press the discussion forward to get through some of these things that I jotted down. Now, of course, you said that scientific methodology cannot be justified. You offered no justification. You made the claim that neither can I justify it. Of course, the claim is that scientific methodology can be justified on a Christian worldview. If you want to know how, you can ask me the question whenever it's your turn to cross-examine, and I'll be glad to give you the Christian answer to the question. Naturalism, you said it's based on it's based on induction. So your conclusion to naturalism, and I think I'm representing you right, you said that you've concluded that based on human experience, that through an inductive process, that you've concluded that nothing supernatural exists. You made the comment, of course, that by your estimation, that it would be nice if God and heaven exist, but the idea of spending eternity in heaven would be something that would be pretty boring. Certainly, I think that would be a grievous misunderstanding of what the actual state of affairs according to the Bible. That's trivial at this point. So let me press this forward. Epistemic limitations. Certainly, I would agree that we have epistemic limitations, but I would say that those limitations are rooted in the fact that we are creatures of God, that we don't have comprehensive knowledge, but because of God's revelation to us, we can have certain knowledge about certain things, of course, through the mediation of revelation. Now, if the Christian God exists, and you said that the idea of facts, what is a fact or the nature of facts is trivial, I of course would differ at that point, because if in fact the Christian worldview is true, then every fact, everything in the world would be characterized by revelation of God. Everything in the world would, of course, be pre-interpreted by God and would have meaning according to its place in the plan of God, this sort of thing. And so the idea that that facts are the interpretation of facts starts in the mind of man rather than the mind of God is the fundamental disagreement. Of course, I'll press this issue a little bit further as we go along in our discussion. But certainly, I would want to ask you to provide some sort of an explanation on how we can have a true interpretation of a fact that has no interpretation apart from the mind of man. And I know, and I'll give you an opportunity to answer that as we go forward. Of course, this idea that presuppositionalists don't provide evidence. Of course, our claim is that everything is evidence of God. Our very self-consciousness, that we live in the atmosphere of God's revelation. Every fact is what it is according to the creative act and plan and providence of God, and that everything evidences God. And so, of course, you obviously, based on what you presuppose to be the case, you reject this claim that everything evidences God, but that is nevertheless our claim. And so we don't say, and we could get into different. I mean, there's no end of evidential arguments for the existence of God. And so the point that I'm making as a presuppositionalist is based on your starting point, you preclude the possibility of a supernatural explanation at the outset. And this idea that you've in some sense disconfirmed or maybe just tentatively concluded, I think that might be closer to what you said, that there is no supernatural aspect to reality based on an inductive process. I would simply say that's not the case. To me, that just seems pretentious to me. I would like to know what the inductive process is. You can say that, my experience, I didn't see fairies frolicking through the grass and this sort of thing, so I concluded God does not exist. But the Bible teaches us that God is evidenced in our very consciousness, that God, reveals himself to us, that we live in the atmosphere of God's revelation, and evidence for God is absolutely inevitable. And this idea that somehow God must show some sort of evidence that would satisfy your epistemic requirement is certainly contrary to what the Bible teaches concerning, the expression of the world, or the worldview that is expressed there. And so, and I'm, of course, if fairies were frolicking through the grass and this sort of thing, and demons were walking down the street, I don't think for a second that would convince you that Christianity is the true worldview. I'm certainly I'm convinced that it might give you a different perspective on things, but I don't think that would make you become a Christian. And of course, I base that on what the Bible says about the condition or the state of the natural man. Let me press on here, and then I'll ask you a few more questions and give you. Then I'll pass it over to you. Let's see here. So no circularity. This idea that naturalism doesn't entail circularity, that somehow, again, that naturalism is confirmed by an inductive process. I say nonsense. Naturalism is predicated on the idea that there is no supernatural explanation that can be considered in terms well, let me just say it this way, that supernatural explanations are precluded based on the naturalist assumption that everything is material. Now, again, you want to make the claim that naturalism is confirmed by an inductive process. Of course, I didn't hear that argument. All I simply said is my experience tells me so. But again, that's just sort of like a just so kind of thing. Like, my experience, again, I haven't seen anything in my experience that would cause me to conclude that God exists or something like that. But of course, I would make the claim that everything in your experience evidences God. However, you just don't want to own up to it. Now, again, now that's not just a hollow sort of assertion that I'm making here. I'm presenting what the Bible says about the character of those who deny God's existence or will not submit their lives to Him. Laws of logic, this idea that laws of logic are general observations and this sort of thing, I would simply, let me just pose the question to you now. I mean, and since you seem to be somewhat astute, your PhD buddy has a 3.5-hour discussion on it that I'm sure that you've watched, so I'm sure you have answers to the question. But tell me again, if the laws of logic are basically general observations, then are you saying that the laws of logic then are reduced to physiological brain states? Is that your claim?
The laws themselves, yes. What they refer to, no. Obviously, a rock is a rock. If no minds existed, rock would still be a rock and not a rock. But you need Aristotle first to determine that that you either have P or not P, that P is equal to P, and it's P or not P, and also not P and not P. You need a mind to come up with that formula, and then we tend to test it inductively by going, hey, look, they're kind of like the most general things we could say about the world.
So are the laws of logic material in nature then, or are they?
Well, no, they're concepts in human minds, like so many other things.
So in your version of a concept, or your understanding of a concept, is a concept simply a brain state?
That's where that's where concepts are held in your brain.
Okay. Now, are concept things that are conceptual in nature, are they universal in any way? How is it that something that is reduced to a brain state can have universal application in the realm of contingent experience?
I'm not sure what it means to say that they're universal, because they're not physically out there. So how could they be universal? They're not everywhere. They're not anywhere. They're just in my head.
Okay. So
I think they refer to real properties of the world.
Yeah. So.
But then again, saying a rock is hard, you could say that's universal, but that isn't really a meaningful thing to say.
Yeah, so the point that I'm trying to make is that if the laws of logic are reduced to brain states, certainly there's a distinction between your brain state and my brain state. So how is it that the quote-unquote laws of logic have a consistent application throughout the realm of contingent experience, given the fact that what goes on in my brain is not the same thing that goes on in your brain? Why is it that, what sort of an explanation can you give to explain the universal character of what we refer to as the laws of logic? I mean, you have a brain, I have a brain. There's no necessary relationship between, the physiological aspect or ongoings or doings of my brain and your brain. But yet, nevertheless, we operate according to a rational process that seems to be consistent and universal. Now, that's not to say that people don't sometimes contradict themselves, but of course, we can recognize contradiction based on, the three fundamental laws of logic that you just mentioned a moment ago. And how is it that then something that seems to have universal application, which on your view is reduced to brain states, how is it that they can in fact apply consistently to the realm of contingent experience?
Well, it seems like a nonsensical question. Like the thing is, when you test them, when you set up a truth table, they are incorrigible. There's just no way for them to be any other way. That's why Aristotle, said that's what Aristotle's conclusion was. Like, they're basically set in stone because they're like the most basal assumptions we can come up with about the world.
I understand that.
Why are they that way? I can't imagine how they could be any other way, honestly.
Right, of course. And so the question is not that they're not self-verified, or not that that the denial of them or the negation of them employs them. And so that's not the claim. And so I don't think it's a nonsensical question to ask that on naturalism, how is it that something that precludes the possibility of anything that's immaterial in character or anything that's universal in character, how is it that they apply consistently in the realm of human experience? And what about their necessity? I would certainly make the argument that the laws of logic are necessary for a coherent understanding of the world, to be able to understand, to make logical connections in the world, to be able to deduce things logically in order to work through the process of discursive or inductive, to think discursively and inductively and formulate conclusions and all this sort of thing. All of these things, of course, entail the laws of logic, that they are in fact necessary for human reason. But how do you explain something that has a necessary character and has a universal application to the realm of contingent experience when your worldview precludes the possibility of anything being universal or necessary?
Yeah, see, when you say necessary character and logic, I think already you're not making a whole lot of sense. It sounds like you're kind of almost anthropomorphizing the ideas, the logical verities, the logical principles. They're simply...
How so?
I do agree that they are integral to human reason in that they're good to test it. That if you have a proposition that entails a logical contradiction, you know that's false. But they're not necessary in any way. They simply are. I mean, they're the most basic things we know about the universe. That things are what they are and aren't what they aren't.
Yeah, I would certainly say that.
I don't think they're necessary. They simply are the case.
Yeah, and so
well, if you're asking like why are they the case, well, I have no idea.
Yeah, okay.
I just can't imagine it could be any other way. You build the truth table and it comes out that way every time.
All right, so let's press it forward. Let's press the conversation forward, because it seems to me that I've asked you in terms of the nature of or the character of the laws of logic, and it seems like your answer in terms of what I've posed to you is just simply I don't know. And so I'll take that move forward, and certainly if that's a misrepresentation of what you said, the kind of idea that how do these things apply, consistently across the whole gamut of contingent experience, well, I don't know.
Well, honestly, I don't think the question makes a whole lot of sense, because like I said, it sounds like you're kind of personifying them when really they're just simple things that, like everything, as far as we know, everything that exists has the attribute of being what it is and not what it isn't.
I don't understand what you mean by...
And we did...
By the idea
Sure,
that I'm giving some sort of anthropomorphic character to the laws of logic or personifying them. What do you mean by that?
Well, even saying that they have character or that they're necessary, they're just very simple, rules about basically arguments. That's really what they're used for. They're not really used to. You don't really go out in the world and say that's a rock. That's not a rock. No one ever does that. But we do use them in arguments. When you see someone make an argument, it's more about human minds. When you see someone make a proposition that has a contradiction, you know it's wrong.
Yeah, the difficulty that I have is that you explain
and we can plug in things we've learned inductively into arguments.
Sure.
But it's not like we go out in the world and we find logic lying on the ground. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It's like we don't find rock hardness as an item. It's an attribute of a rock, and one of the attributes a rock has is being a rock and not a rock.
Yeah, so the difficulty I have is that you speak of the laws of logic, you use language that would assume some sort of universality to them, but yet you deny the universality. You just say, well, it's just the way it is.
I'm not sure what you mean by universal, though. Like, what do you mean when you say the universal?
That they consistently apply to the realm of contingent experience without variation. In other words, you want to make the claim that the laws of logic are physiological in character. They're just something that happens. They're brain states. But the problem is there's 7 billion people in the world with 7 billion different brain states, and what goes on inside of my brain is not what goes on inside of your brain. Yet we both employ laws of reason that seem to have a consistent application across the whole realm of human experience, and that's what I mean by universal. The idea.
I hope I'm using consistent ones. I don't want to use the inconsistent ones.
Yeah. Well, I'm arguing with a Vedic Hindu next week, and so I'll save that for them. But at any rate, so you speak of them as though they're universal, but yet you deny but you deny their universal character. Now, I'm not personifying them or giving some sort of anthropomorphic identity or anything like that. I'm simply saying, how is it that something that is reduced to a physiological brain state that is represented over 7 billion times by 7 billion different brain states, how is it that these things can apply invariantly across the whole gamut of contingent human experience? And you know as well as I do.
Well,
go ahead.
Let me go ahead and give it a shot. To honest, I would just say it's not surprising to the universal, given, as I said, they're the most basic things we can say about anything. That they is what it is, isn't what it isn't. So that they're universal is not surprising. That's why scientific laws tend to be universal, because they're usually just so darn simple. Like
so,
gravity,
are they universal or not
gravity,
universal?
Law of force. F equals ma. These are very, very simple and universal. And they're universal because they're simple. When things get more complicated, you tend to have more room for error.
Okay.
So when you have the most basic thing we can say about anything that exists, that it's universal is not surprising. And in fact, I don't think that it's universal is all that interesting. It's just like, well, of course they are. It's the most basic thing I can say about anything. Of course it's going to be universal. It'd be weird if it wasn't.
Yeah, so you just said a moment ago that they weren't universal, or you denied their universal character. Now you're saying they are universal. So
I didn't really know what you meant.
Yeah, okay.
But now
So
I know what
that's
you
what I was
mean,
going to say. Maybe
sure, they're universal.
But the idea that it's the answer, or answering the question in this way, saying, well, it's not surprising that that's the case. That's simply to say that you don't have an answer for the question, or you don't have an explanation. Now, of course, you can push that back on me.
Does.
Yeah, well, I know that's what you believe, but of course, I believe that I can answer the question based on God's revelation, and you can press me on that as we move forward. But let's just shelf that for a minute, and let me see if there's anything else that I want to hit in terms of what you said in your opening statement. You said the metaphysics of religion. Of course, you said it generally is false. Certainly, I don't think that that's demonstrable in any sort of way. I don't think you can demonstrate that. I know how your argument goes, that the inductive process of your human experience, you've concluded, since there's no fairies frolicking and this sort of thing, therefore the metaphysics of religion is false. This idea that presuppositionalism is sort of like some sort of citadel for the people of God. This idea that, well, the Bible is the Word of God. There's no evidence to support it, but you must believe it. I would simply dismiss that. The idea that there's no evidence is your claim, not my claim. My claim is everything evidences God. My claim, of course, is that the inductive principle has no rational foundation except on the basis of God's revelation. You can press me on that later, but let's push this forward. You said you don't have an explanation for the beginning of the world, so I'll just leave that alone for now. Okay, so you said presuppositionalism is not an argument to replace epistemology. I would certainly contend that it's what you would call a revelational epistemology, and you can ask me about that, and I'll give you an explanation of that. Let's see here. And of course, the idea that the truth of the presuppositional methodology, or the vindication of the truth of it, entails the the disprove or the disproving of every possible worldview. I would just simply reject that idea on the grounds. I'd say that, well, first of all, we can only deal with the worldviews that we know of, and of course, I would maintain that the Christian worldview does in fact provide the transcendental necessity for intelligible human experience. And so I can only take one worldview at a time. This idea that somehow a worldview has to be vindicated by the negation of every other possible worldview, I just simply think that that seems to me to be philosophically naive, and I would say that that's simply nonsense. Now, I'll stop there for now, and I think I went long enough, and I'll just pass it on to you. Are you there?
All right. Well, sure. Let's just start with prove that logic is universal.
Well, I mean, I would say it like this. First of all, I would say that logic is universal because of the universal application that it has in the realm of contingent human experience. Now I've said that already. Now I would say the reason why logic.
Well, actually, you kind of just said it twice. You said it's universal because it's universal.
Well, I can tell you. Well, I can tell you why it's universal. You won't like the answer, but no, that's not.
Oh no, I'll hear the answer I don't like. It's all good.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want me to? Are you going to ask another question, or do you want further explanation?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said, yeah. Go ahead and tell me the answer that I'm not going to like.
Oh, let's go ahead and tell you the answer. Okay. So first of all, I said that logic is universal because it applies invariantly to the contingent realm of human experience. I don't think that's the same thing as saying it's universal because it's universal. Now, in terms of why it's universal, or sort of how can we provide an explanation for the universal character of the laws of logic, I would simply say that the laws of logic are a reflection of the way God thinks and the way He expects us to think, because God is absolute and invariant. God has, of course, who is rational, thinks in a rational manner, in a consistent way. He created the world to reflect His rationality. He created us as rational creatures in His image to reflect His thoughts, to think in a manner that is consistent with the way He thinks, and certainly I would say that is an explanation for their universal character.
Well, I didn't want an explanation because the story's pretty easy. I meant, you have a proof. Something analytic, something to prove that they're universal.
Well, you know this already too. I mean, the proof is, as you stated
I'm
yourself.
probably gonna ask mostly questions that I know the answers to.
Yeah,
sorry.
well, I mean, because this isn't your first rodeo with presuppositionalism, but of course we would say that the proof is by the impossibility of the contrary. I would say that the worldview provided to us in the Bible is the only worldview that can sustain anything that's universal in character.
Okay, so how about you set it up in like a logical argument with premises and conclusion? How would that look? The proof that you obviously, if you're proving something, you have an argument, and so you have premises and a conclusion. So if you're intending to point out, it in that terms?
Yeah, if you're doing this to demonstrate the circular character of my argument, I mean, I could certainly do the same thing to you. Now, of course.
Oh well, I hope it's not circular. I do hope it's not circular, but I want to see where it goes.
Well, I mean, I think of course my argument is circular, but you have not demonstrated that yours is not. I mean, you simply assume such to be the case, and that, of course, I could simply say, well, I've verified the universal character of the laws of logic through the inductive process of my human experience. I could offer the same explanation as you, but I'm precluded from doing that because I'm precluded from giving that as the particular or my primary explanation, although I do think that human experience does in fact verify the universal character of the laws of logic. But I would say that the reason that the laws of logic work or are possible, or the reason why they have any rational grounding, is because of the metaphysic applied by the Bible. Now we could say, to put that in some sort of a deductive syllogism.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off there, but yeah. I was hoping for some premises and a conclusion there. Well, if you don't have that, that's fine. We can move on. But I assumed you had that if you said you have a proof.
Yeah, so this idea that somehow something has to be demonstrated deductively through some sort of syllogistic process, otherwise...
not necessarily a syllogism, but, premise, conclusion.
Okay, premise one, God is absolute personality, and His existence is a say. God, who is rational, who is a rational person, created a rational world. God also created creatures in His image, rational creatures in His image, to reflect His rationality. God thinks in a logically coherent and consistent way. By his very nature, he is coherent. His thoughts reflect that, and on the basis of his revelation to us and our createdness, we are able to think in a coherent way that reflects God's internal coherence. I know I piled up a bunch of propositions there, but that's essentially the argument, but you know that.
Well, okay. Well, like I said, with any argument, now comes the difficult part, which is where you defend the premises. And I think that's where the trouble comes with presuppositionalism, because at some point you'd have to either provide evidence or say, well, I just assumed that.
Well,
it's starting something axiomatic. So we could go down the list if you like, though. Your first one was God is absolute personality and his existence is a say. Could you defend that premise? Show that it's a part of reality.
Yeah, well,
this would first start showing that the God exists and then showing that he has these attributes.
Well, of course, I would say that that particular premise is self-verified, but you know that already. You said that God. I mean, I don't use
self-verified.
Of course, self-attesting that the reality of God, that the absolute personality of God is something that is pervasive in our human experience, because we live in the context of God's revelation. God created everything that is not God, and of course, all of this evidence is God. The problem is that that you want to reject that as a sufficient argument or a sufficient reason or justification for the particular premise. But that is the Christian justification. The problem is you don't like that. Now, I could say that I could turn it around and say the same thing to you. I could say, well, why don't you justify the claim that nothing immaterial exists? That is a proposition, and all you've done so far is say, well, my human experience leads me to believe that. But that's not an explanation. That's just saying, it's just that way.
Well, I wouldn't say that I don't like it. In fact, I would say it's, as far as if the goal here was to quote unquote win a debate, I think that's a point in my favor, because self-evident. Well, why would I grant that? I mean, a Buddhist could say the same thing about his God, and a Muslim could say the same thing. Self-evident doesn't really get you. You're basically saying it's obvious. That's what self-evident kind of means. It's obvious.
Of course.
Well, of course, it's not obvious, or I would believe these things. So it's not obvious to me. So unless I grant you that it's self-evident, which I'm not, you would have to do something more and say, well, of course it's the case. Because I mean, were you planning to say that all the premises were self-evident? Because then it's not much of a defense of it. Well, that's self-evident. That's self-evident. You could literally do that with any argument you ever presented on any subject.
Right, but that's why we got to get down to the presuppositional character of the dispute in the first place. Now, of course, a Buddhist could say that.
Presuppositions, because as I said, our presuppositions are the same for the most part, apart from some additional ones. I assume you also assume that the external world exists. You assume induction works, right?
Well, of course, I assume induction works, but I believe I have an explanation for why it works. Well, this idea that we agree on, however you just stated a moment ago, that we agree on most things or most presuppositions or this sort of thing. I think that our agreement would be simply artificial, because our metaphysical starting point is totally different. For example, your conception of facts and evidence is, in some sense, they're brute. They're not ultimately rational in character. And you might want to impose some sort of idea of natural law.
Well, yeah, I didn't actually say any of that, but okay.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to misrepresent you, but at any rate, I mean, I would like to hear you give an explanation of an ultimate rationality with respect to the realm of contingent experience. But of course, you and I have a totally different.
Hold on a second. Ultimate rationality for contingent experience. See, I hear lots of phrases like that from presuppositionalists. The thing is, when I try to parse them out with friends of mine, they're like, that made no sense at all. It actually, there was nothing. It was, I guess, what
from my perspective.
The guy Dennett would call a deepity. That it sounds meaningful, but it's either trivial or false, depending on how you look at it.
Well, of course, that's what I would expect from you based on what your presuppositions are. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense.
Well, I'll tell you what are my presuppositions?
Well, I think your metaphysical starting point is the non-existence of God, and I know you want to deny that.
Well, see, we're already off to a bad start, because that is not the case. I've never presupposed God didn't exist. I was unaware of the concept until I wasn't made aware of the concept, and I wasn't presupposing it then. And when I heard the concept, I thought it was. I never told the guy, well, of course you're wrong, because I presupposed that you're wrong. I never had to do that. I don't honestly. I've met quite a few presuppositionalists.
Well, let me ask you the question.
Who claim that I found quite a few presuppers who have claimed that I presuppose that their worldview is wrong. I have never run into an atheist that does, lactheist or otherwise. I've never run into someone who believes like I do, who said, well, I'm pretty sure Christianity is true because I presuppose it. I've never heard that. And yet I've heard the accusation, I don't know how many times. Is it biblical? Is it coming from the Bible, that accusation? Or is it just part of the argument, like there's no way to make it work unless we have to be anti? You have to presuppose one thing and I have to presuppose the opposite. Because I'm sorry, I don't presuppose the opposite. I am open to the possibility that your beliefs are true. It's unlikely. I think it's very unlikely. I think I'm probably going to die an atheist, and I'm also pretty sure I'm right. But I am still at least open to it, and I have to say that if you are presupposing that the Bible is true and that your God exists, then you are clearly not dogmatic and not open to being wrong. And I think it's important that you are open to being wrong.
Well, I think in principle, I would say, well, let me respond to that. I would say in principle that, rationally speaking, if there were no reasons to believe in God, that I would relinquish that belief. But certainly I believe that God is the foundation for rationality. So in principle, I'm open to it. Now, this idea that you don't presuppose the non-existence of God, I just simply think that seems to me to be disingenuous. Now, I don't mean that as a moral indictment against you, like you're lying, you're lying and that sort of thing. That's not what I mean by that. So please don't misunderstand me.
That's fine.
I just don't think that you've given any rational demonstration that that's not the case. In other words, your starting point is all that exists can be reduced to matter, essentially. I mean, I'm probably.
Well, hold on. I would agree to that. However, there's a difference between starting points, which are just simply like, wherever I happen to be in wherever my beliefs are right now is my starting point, versus presuppositions, which to me are entirely properly basic beliefs, very basic things about the world.
I think that's an artificial distinction.
What you're talking. What is it? Well, I mean, in that case, we need to use different words, because what you're meaning by starting point, what I mean, are different things. I do not have materialism or naturalism, or those are not starting points in the sense that you're using them. Those are simply things I've concluded from just being in the world. And those conclusions can change. So obviously, if they're not presuppositions, because they can change. Presuppositions are properly basic beliefs. You really can't change them. I mean, you have to apply them every day, even though you can't justify them, or I mean, you claim you do. But actually, let's go off it a bit. You said that your argument is circular, and you also said that mine is as well. Now, I'll ask you to demonstrate that mine is circular as well later. But for now, why do you think it's okay to have a tautology and consider that to be a valid synthetic argument? A synthetic argument being an argument about the world.
I understand.
If it's circular, how is that? I mean, obviously, I guess technically tautologies are valid, but.
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to figure out if they're sound or not, isn't it? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree with that in a qualified sense. Now, when you talk about a tautology, I mean the idea that I affirm the existence of the Christian God and I won't accept anything to count against it. That it just is what it is, and so I have a tautology on my hands. So let's just forget it. Let's stop arguing and go home. No, I said that rationally speaking. That in principle, and you said something similar, I suppose, but rationally speaking, that if there were no reasons for belief in God, I would relinquish that belief. And so I don't think that's a tautology. Now, of course, I would affirm, based on my worldview, that every synthetic proposition, I would say that is an accurate depiction of the contingent realm of human experience. Is in fact evidence, or is in fact evidence and consistent with my conception of reality. This idea that I preclude synthetic propositions, that I'm not offering any sort of evidence. No, you missed the point altogether. What I'm saying is that every synthetic proposition that accurately portrays how reality is in fact evidence for the worldview that I maintain.
I mean, that's fine. It's just. Aren't you applying things? Aren't you applying other properly basic beliefs in an attempt to justify those same beliefs? And if so, I guess the only way to put it, shouldn't you stop doing that? I've never ran into a circular argument that a philosopher went, "Yeah, I'm glad that went in a circle."
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we have a fundamental disagreement on the character of worldview. You maintain that worldviews are not circular, at least not all of them, and I maintain that they are. And so,
they can be. They can. I hear atheists do this all the time. Atheists will say that, well, how do I know? How do I know induction works? Because I use it, and that's. I try and get them to stop saying that.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not good. You have to use induction to do it. You formed a circle, and that's bad. So I mean,
but this idea,
as I mentioned before, begging the question is actually what people usually call it. And in essence, begging the question is when your premise and conclusion, you can derive your conclusion from just one premise. So you have all these other premises, but you don't need them because only one of your premises is your conclusion.
Yeah, but I would argue
in that case, you've said something twice. What benefit is that as far as figuring out whether it's true or not?
Yeah, I mean, I know you know the difference between a vicious circular argument and one that kind of goes around the merry-go-round a couple times, and we don't have to sit.
Actually, I don't. I actually don't know the difference. I've heard virtuous and vicious, but again, when I talk to a philosopher, he's like, that's not a real distinction, other than to say that, well, it's virtuous if God's involved and it's vicious if God's not involved, which, well that's just another assertion on top of it.
Yeah, so
if that's what you say.
Yeah, well, yeah, anyway, I won't bore you with some sort of an explanation unless you ask for one in terms of what it is. But at any rate,
I'm asking for one. Go for it. Bore me. It's all right.
All right. So, like for example, a vicious circle, okay, or I don't want to, I'm not jealous for the word virtuous, vicious. I know that some Christians might say this is a virtuous circle, but a vicious circle is, the Bible says it's the Word of God. Therefore, the Bible, that God says in the Bible that the Bible is the Word of God. God exists, therefore the Bible is the Word of God. Something like that, for lack of a more sophisticated way of presenting a vicious circular argument. Now, that's not what I'm doing. That's not an argument that I use. Now, I know you want to reduce it to that. What I'm saying is that the absolute authority that I appeal to, my starting point, is in fact the veracity of the Bible, God's revelation. But what I'm saying is that the entirety of our human experience, going back to what you want to talk about, synthetic propositions, you want to talk about the actual state of affairs in the world, all of that evidences my particular starting point. Now, it's true that my starting point is my conclusion, but I would maintain that so is yours. Now, you want to deny that and say, no, my human experience, I start out with properly basic beliefs and this sort of thing, and I experience the world, and therefore, by the means of, my properly basic beliefs, that I have vindicated the truthfulness of my worldview, at least tentatively so. I don't know how you want to quantify it. I'm 90% certain, I'm 99% certain that I'm right, or that my worldview is true, or whatever. To me, I just think that that's simply nonsense. I don't think that's the case. I think that's simply evading the actual state of affairs, that you do in fact presuppose your worldview.
All right, one quick, my
headphones
are about to go out, so I'm going to have to switch to speakers.
All right, sure.
So it might be a little bit echo, but that's okay. I do have a mute on this thing, so that helps. 1 second. Where are you, speakers? Yeah, I probably need to change it over in these settings too, real quick.
How are we doing on time, Mr. Joseph?
There we go. So yeah, you're gonna echo now, but I'm gonna
now. Can you hear us, JD? You still there?
Yes.
Okay, so I was just asking Joseph how we doing on time. How are we doing on time?
It's 9:40 now.
Okay, so where are we at?
Time-wise for...
Are we ready to switch the...
Well, I was trying to remember what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah,
let me last little quick bit in this, because it's technically my time, I think. The difference between vicious and virtuous. The thing is, a circular argument is a circular argument. There's a tautology for you. In the end, if you can get your conclusion from just one premise, you haven't really said anything. And you certainly aren't talking about evidence about the world. And my issue with, taking the Bible as a quote-unquote ultimate standard, one, I think ultimate standard is silly. People should simply just make the least number of assumptions possible. And if you're assuming the Bible's massive list of claims, you are just violating Occam's razor to the nth degree, and you really shouldn't do that. And the fact is, the Bible list of claims is, in a sense, a list of synthetic propositions. Mm-hmm. And shouldn't you be testing those, like every other synthetic proposition, using induction, using your senses? When we
yeah, of
learn
course,
about the world,
but JD, you know,
we learn about it.
But JD,
we test it against, we test the world to see if it's the case. We test our synthetic propositions, and the Bible can be done, and in fact has been done for like the most 2,000 years before you came along. People were testing the Bible, and some would conclude it was true, and some would conclude it was false. To just throw that all out and say, you know what, it's my starting point.
No, yeah, to say that's my starting point is not throwing all that out. Certainly, I would maintain that the synthetic propositions in the Bible have been substantiated. Of course, you know that's the case. I mean, just as there's voluminous books that challenge the rational coherence of the Bible, there's voluminous books that work towards the end of vindicating the rational coherence.
Well, then why bother presupposing it all? Why have it as like an axiomatic starting point? Why not just go the evidentiary route the way people have done for centuries?
Because
it seems like the more honest route.
Because the worldview presented to us in the Bible precludes that as a morally appropriate take or posture or stance or.
How come the other Christians in the world haven't noticed this? You mentioned you're defending Christian theism, but the fact is, presuppositionalism is a very tiny minority of Christians.
Well, I have reasons for. I mean, I have
How,
reasons why.
how are they
why,
getting it wrong?
why-
In fact, how are 2,000 years of Christians getting it wrong? Presuppositional has been around for like 60, maybe 70 years, and even when Van Til came up with it, very few people were really getting a hold of it until Bonson got a hold of it.
That's
It was
not
a very tiny minority. How did they get it wrong for so long?
Well, I mean, you know the answer to that question. I mean, the development of Christian thought throughout the centuries. You know, God in His providence has sort of brought the development of Christian thought along on a certain trajectory. Now, it's not as though well, of course, I would simply dispute the claim that presuppositionalism is something new that started with Cornelius Van Til and Gordon Clark and these sorts of guys. I think that they simply worked out the implications of what many Christians had taught. For example, St. Augustine. Of course, he made the claim that faith is the foundation for reason, and of course, the presuppositional approach really builds on that particular idea, which I believe is the biblically that is the faithful application of what we would refer to as a biblical epistemology and so forth. So, of course, you know.
Okay.
So whose turn is it on the question Q&A?
I just want to throw one final
go ahead.
It's come up a few times. You've claimed a few times that my worldview, or I assume you mean is my epistemology, is circular. In what way?
Well, I would say that you assume the self-sufficiency of your human reason to be an accurate guide to truth, to the preclusion of the necessity of revelation. And I would say you presuppose that, you can't demonstrate that. That is your starting point, and I would say that is circular.
Well, how's it circular? I mean, like I said, a circular argument is where your premise and conclusion is somewhere. One of your premises can make your conclusion. So where in that do I have a premise and a conclusion that are the same?
Okay, so well, let me ask you the question: do you believe that your human reason is self-sufficient? Would you affirm that?
Hold on a second.
Is that a
I thought you
proposition?
had the argument. What do you need to ask me questions?
Well, just because I don't want to misrepresent it, is that a proposition that you affirm? Would that be a fair premise?
Okay, well, I don't want to be rude, but I mean, if you weren't sure, you probably shouldn't have said it in the first place before asking, right?
Come on, don't be disingenuous, JD. I mean, I'm just.
Oh no, that's not disingenuous. You made the assertion that my worldview is circular before asking me what my propositions are.
Let me forego.
If you're saying my worldview is circular, that means you know enough about it to show that it's circular. But clear that you need to ask me questions first.
JD, you know that the reason I'm asking the question is simply to set up the answer that you're looking for. That's all it is. It's not because I'm digging for extra information.
If you have, I'm making an important point here, and that is, if your argument requires my input, then you don't really have an argument. And so it's important that you don't overstep things.
Again, come on,
and ask someone the questions first before you start claiming that their worldview is circular. Yeah, because I will tell you right now, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyways, JD, I mean,
go ahead and ask the question though.
No. I don't want to. I can preclude the question. I mean, I think you're sharp enough to understand what I was doing. This whole sort of notion.
I am crazy brilliant. You have no idea.
Well, congratulations, by the way. And so
I know, I'm very proud of it.
Yeah. So, do you want to enter into a beauty contest with me?
Done. I will win so easily. I'm gorgeous too. All right. Well, anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So so you wanted me to demonstrate how your starting point is or your worldview is circular. Is that right? Okay. So
Correct.
Now I said that you assume the self-sufficiency of your human reason. Okay. Now I would say
I'm actually not sure what that means. Self-sufficiency of human reason.
That human reason is an accurate guide to truth, to a true understanding of the world.
Do I assume that? Sure, yeah.
Okay, and everything that you do assumes that proposition. So I mean, it's like this. It's like I assume that human reason is an accurate guide to truth, and I would add, to the preclusion of revelation. I don't need revelation to come to a true understanding of the world. I mean,
well, yeah, you'd have to throw that last part out because that is not something I presuppose. For all I know, revelation is a real thing. For all I know, I'll start getting messages from God tomorrow. So I don't preclude it. I simply have never seen it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, that's I don't understand why you take it. I mean, to me it seems like that you are playing this sort of evasive game of saying my worldview is not circular. I don't preclude the possibility of revelation. I just, through the inductive process of my experience, I just don't have no reason to believe it. But
I think even if I did preclude it, I still don't think see how that would make my worldview circular.
Well, let me try one more time. If If you start with the sufficiency of your human reason, the formulation of every synthetic proposition, the evaluation of any evidence, facts, anything that is stated, assumes that to be the case. And so I don't understand why that's so difficult to believe. I mean, it's
Oh no, that's fine. You're saying what I believe so far, but where's the circle? We haven't actually gotten to the circle part yet.
Okay, it would be the same thing as saying that my human sufficient is reason because my human reason is sufficient because my human reason is sufficient. Demonstrate how your human reason is sufficient. You can't do that. And so essentially, what the implication of your starting point is in fact circular. I mean, I can state it that way. You can deny it, but it's nevertheless the case.
Well, I mean, I never said that though. I said that I assume that my reasoning works, but I've never attempted to. I've never formed an argument. I mean, the easiest way to show this is to ask you to form a premise, an argument that comes out of something I've said or something I believe. And well, I mean, I could say, as I point out, I could say it twice, but I would never say that premise, and that conclusion actually shows that it's a fact about the world, because it's just a tautology, and tautologies, that would just be an analytic true. It would be analytically true, but there'd be no way to tell that it's a fact about the world. I assume it, but I would never say that I know it or that I can justify it. And an attempt to justify it would definitely be circular. But when have I ever attempted to justify it?
Yeah, to say that you've never actually stated it in any sort of syllogistic form that would entail a conclusion that was found in one of your premises, that sort of thing, that's simply just to deny the implication of your starting point. That's all. I mean, you don't have to say it. That is what is implied.
Well, I think that's wrong, but that is also in the literature. They would say that's not the case.
Well, to not explicitly.
So I mean, in a sense, you're kind of presenting a novel idea here.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I mean, the idea that there's some sort of implied conclusion isn't anything that's novel at all. I mean,
just because the implied conclusion is that I'm justifying my starting points by using them, because again, I would say I would never do that. That would be silly. Yeah, that would be circular, and I would avoid doing that, because you shouldn't do that.
What I would simply say that's the implication. That's the implication, and just saying that that's not so. I don't think that that gives you. Well,
you say it's the implication, but you haven't actually demonstrated the implication. You just assume that. Well, you must do that, right? Some point you must do that, and I was like, well, of course not, because that would be circular.
Yeah, and then again, I think
that's why it's called that's why it's called foundationalism. You start with foundations. You do not justify them. You simply work from there. So what you're saying is circular is in fact just a straight line. Presuppositions, reasoning, conclusions.
Yeah,
the conclusions are never, therefore my reasoning works. I would never do that, because those things I cannot justify, and using them to justify them would be wrong. It's why I don't. It's why most people don't. So I get how your argument requires that accusation. It's not true. It's never been true. I can't say it's not true of all atheists, because like I said, I've run into people who just philosophically naive, who will say, yes, I know induction works. I use induction, or I know my senses works. I test them. And so there are people who will do that. And honestly, the thing is, though, luckily you explain to them and they'll say, oh, right, I should stop making circular arguments. And I was one of those people. I'm sure somewhere in the past I said induction works because I test it. And then I realized that would be circular, that is stupid, and I don't do that anymore. So my reasoning is improved by not applying circular reasoning to properly basic beliefs, because that's what it means to be properly basic. They're the tools of reason. You can't justify the tools of reason. They're what you would call pre-reason.
Of course.
So justifying them would be silly, because then again you end up with a circular argument.
Yeah, then that's.
But you of course have continued the accusation that I'm doing that anyway. Well, I don't know how many ways I could say I'm not, because I definitely have it in the sentence. You're left with saying that there's somehow that implication there, but.
Well, the foundationalism is predicated on the idea, of course, that you don't need justification for your properly basic beliefs, that they're self-verified and this sort of thing. Of course, that
actually depends a little bit, but yeah, for the most part.
Okay, well,
there are different variations to foundationalism. There's some other requirements.
Yeah, no, I realize.
They have to be incorrigible beliefs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I'm aware, but at any rate, the point that I wanted to make is that it's simply the idea that, well, these things are just the way they are and I don't need any rational justification. Of course, that's consistent with what you presuppose to be the case. I would, of course, as a presuppositionalist, I would say that we do have rational justification for those sorts of things. You just simply reject our explanation for those. And if you want to know what the explanation, I know you've heard it before.
Well, yeah, I rejected the grounds that it's circular, in which case you haven't really told me anything.
Yeah, I mean,
P, therefore P. Obviously, that tells you nothing about whether the proposition is true. Only that I guess maybe that you believe it's true. But you need to go outside of something. If you've got a circular argument, then it's really just analytic. You haven't actually said anything about the world yet. which is why it's important that you don't form a circular argument, because a circular argument is going to end up being analytic only. That it's true if the premises are true, but then you have to actually demonstrate the premises are true. And so if you have a circular argument, you're like, well, here's a circular argument, and the premises are self-evident. Well, I mean, that's just lazy thinking, I would say. I mean, you try to publish that in any paper, they're going to laugh at you.
Yeah.
And with good reason. You need to put work in. I mean, like I said earlier on, reality is difficult. Like we haven't even touched morality. Morality is a mess and really difficult. And it would be nice if it was nice and easy and you could just have this list of rules, but things just aren't that easy in the world.
All right, so is it my turn? Yeah,
What
time is it here?
It's freaking late. I should be in bed already, but that's okay.
All right, so I mean, I certainly have more questions that I would like to ask.
1 in the morning here for me.
Yeah, is it really? Wow. Okay, so
that's fine. The kids can go to school late.
Okay, so
hey, I'm an atheist. I have no foundation for morality. Screw them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish we had gotten morality, because I lean towards non-cognitivism, either quasi-realism or emotivism, and that's always fun to talk about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can do that if you like. I mean,
I think maybe we'll do that in a future date, though. Perhaps if we do this again.
Yeah, sure. Let me see.
It's getting pretty late. Although I don't want to. I'll let you. You had some questions.
No. I will.
We left a lot on the table there, so if you have a couple follow-ups to what we recently said, let's go ahead and wrap those up.
Yeah, we did. Would you be interested in continuing a dialogue rather than doing a formal debate style? It's much more fun to me just to have dialogue and interchange.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We should have one on my channel. I'm sure you guys can figure out how Hangouts work. It's a little better. The video, it definitely works a bit better that way.
All right. So if you extend the invitation, I would be glad to join you, and we can continue the
Will
dialogue.
do. I will not invite you to TST. That is the lion's den, and that is not fun for most people. So.
Yeah, no, I you know, in the context of TST, I have no problem with it. In other words, I'm not going to cast stones because
there will be a lot cast at you. Most people don't like being like an obvious punching bag. Not to mention the cursing gets out of hand sometimes.
Yeah, and so again, that's not anything that I would fret over. You know, I've been a believer for 17 years, and so I've been I've found myself.
Honestly, if you're like this, you probably actually won't get hammered. We tend to treat people as they come, and if you're relatively polite, even if we disagree with your arguments, we'll usually cordially, despite the name of the show. If you come in there like, gee man, okay, you might have a problem.
JD, shut up. Let me talk. JD, stop. Shut up. Let me answer. No, I'm just playing. But yeah, let's do this. I don't want to keep you up late, and I don't want to leave the impression that either you or I are in any way sort of evading a continued discussion. So if we can both cordially agree to continue the discussion, and I'd be happy to do so on your channel. And again, I've been mired in a context where I am certainly the only believer, or at least the minority. With certain, certainly with other people, very.
Really, in Arizona?
Well, what is that? What do you think? What do you think? Everybody's Christians in Arizona? Is that what your impression is?
Well, I do have family friends in Arizona. Well, they're atheists. Well, one of them's sort of like an atheist, but also believes in psychics. So she's a bit crazy. Yeah. Oddly enough, has a PhD. Still believes in psychics and that gods don't exist. I don't know how that works, but. I assume Arizona. It's kind of close to Texas, right? Texas is a bit on the evangelical side.
You know, I had a guy tell me the other day, sort of to digress a little bit. I was at a funeral, and he walked up and he introduced himself to me, and he was an ethnic gentleman, and I thought he was Hispanic, but he was it was a little bit ambiguous. And he told me, he introduced himself, and he says, "Yeah, I'm from the Promised Land." So of course I thought that he was telling me that he was from Israel, right? And then so I'm like, "Oh, really cool." And then the very next thing out of his mouth is he's like, "Yeah, I'm from Texas."
Lord.
So I'm like, yeah, good one. So, anyways, so yeah.
Other countries. That's actually one of my interests. That's probably my larger arguments against theology, against religions in general, especially ones that have a God that judges. Like, why does he hate my son? My son is autistic, and so he's been an atheist since he was 11, and that is a trend. That is a statistical trend with autistic people. Which means, if you go with your religious beliefs, that means he's going to a very bad place for a very long time. And by a very long time, in a really, really long time. Yeah. That kind of goes, to me, that goes against the idea that the world is just, which I would expect a just world if one of the religions is true, because it's one of the things they're selling is that the world is really just. Whatever God does is just. And yet I see things that aren't just. Even it doesn't really matter what standard you pick. You can buy the emotional standards. It's just like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why does he hate 98% of the people in Iraq? Iraq is maybe 2% Christian. 98% of them are all going to go suffer.
I would say that that's a misrepresentation, but we could that of course would be,
that'll be a subject for another time.
Yeah, because it would open up a whole nother can of worms tonight. But of course, I'm sure you've heard the answers before, but we can restate them and this. But anyways, I would just like to say that I appreciate your cordial participation. I enjoyed much more our open dialogue than the formal setting that I began with. And by the way, I've never done a formal debate before or anything like that. I'm more inclined to do open dialogue. I think that's more fruitful, and we can sort of get down. So
hey, blame your moderator. I go ahead and choose a formal debate.
Yeah. So
his idea, by the way.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, I mean, I was kind of on the fence, but I really didn't care either way. But I kind of started formulating this open statement. I say, hey, I would really like to say all of this stuff, and so that's kind of where that went. But it probably would have been better served if I would have just shelved that and we just could have just got in and just started from the beginning to have sort of like a cross-examination dialogue, and we'll do it that way going forward. But hey, I know it's late there, 1 o'clock in the morning. Don't want to keep you up. Certainly don't want to be any sort of an imposition towards you.
It's not that big a deal. If I could get you to walk away no longer saying that atheists presuppose that you're wrong, that would be a victory for me.
Yeah.
That particular one annoys me because it's just so obviously false. Like, I can tell you my beliefs, like, well, on top of what you just said, there's that other thing you didn't say where you presuppose that Christianity is a bunch of hokum.
Well,
no.
Yeah.
I'm
that's not going to happen.
There's an atheist out there who does do that. I just never met him.
Well, that's not going to happen. We're not going to walk away. We're not going to depart from that discussion that way. But how we can depart from the discussion is by me saying to you that I will not enable you to engage in any morally inappropriate behavior, like taking your kids to school late. So I'm going to let you get off the phone and get some rest.
All right.
Hey, appreciate it very
Wife's
much, JD.
probably lonely too.
Yeah, extend the invitation to me. I look forward to joining you on TST. I look forward to it. And when I receive the invitation, I'll be glad to join.
All right. It is let's see your time. It is 4 p.m. Pacific time.
Oh, so it's an open invitation.
Yeah, it's every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, so
it's supposed to go to 8, but we go into overtime more often than I'd like. Sometimes we just get stuck on a topic; it just keeps going.
So to do that, we just need to have Google Hangouts, right? And then you can just click the link and jump in.
Yeah, pretty much. I'll invite you to the Hangout invite group. So if you have your Hangouts open around that time, you'll see a link go out for the join and also a link to watch, and that'll also be sent out on YouTube as well. So if you're subscribed to me, you also bump into it as well.
Right on. We'll make sure we figure that out.
It's like Skype. It's pretty easy to do.
All right, sounds great. Again, appreciate the time, JD. It's only what is it, 10 o'clock here?
Yeah.
I hate you all.
Yeah. So it's only 10 o'clock here. So I'm gonna go home and kiss my wife, who will still be awake, by the way, and my children probably will be as well. And so, anyways, for the sake of not bantering on any farther, thanks, JD. Appreciate it. Real class act. I appreciate your skillfulness in presenting yourself with class and stating your arguments.
Oh crap! I did it wrong. Class. Dang it.
Try harder next time. Jeez.
Yeah. So
next time I come in here like you MF and F this and MFF. That'll be my start. That'll be my starting thing. Just like how many Eddie Murphy like.
It's too late for that because you said that the jerk. The atheist jerk is the old JD, and that somehow
he still comes out sometimes. It's just I don't respond to, as you guys have been cordial and nice, and so I'm always going to respond to that in kind. It's really just the golden rule, I guess.
Yeah, sure. All right. So hey, appreciate it, JD. Have a good night. Get some rest, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too. Have a good night.
All right.
Good
night.
Bye. Damn. There you go. Part 1. No, we're not off. We're still talking. We got.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
I mean, there's still people watching.
Okay.
We were supposed to do a whole thing. There were supposed to be closing statements. There were supposed to be questions asked afterwards. There was supposed to be a 10-minute opening statement, but 45 minutes later, here we are.
In retrospect, I wish we could have just foregone the whole opening statement process and could have just had open dialogue. I think that would be much more entertaining and fruitful.
Yeah. So is that how we're gonna go forward next week?
I think so. Yeah, rather than having, I prefer the informal, just open dialogue, just sort of civilly combative back and forth, this sort of thing. I think that's more fruitful, and I think it's more entertaining. And so, how do we want to conclude? Do we want to open up the phone? I know it's late, and there's only a few people still watching.
Yeah, we can open up the phone. Let me open it up right now. Give it a few minutes. See if anybody wants to call in. Let me get to the thing. They're not open yet, but they will be here shortly. As soon as I figure out how to work my phone. All right, the phone line is open. The number is at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, go ahead and give us a call, and we will take your call right now for the next few minutes and stuff.
And in the meantime, Mr. Junior Varsity is going to bust a freestyle. Go.
Nope, not gonna do it because I don't know how to do it. So I'll just say the same thing over again.
Did we just go from 5 to 3 viewers just now? We did.
Yeah, that happened. You're welcome. Maybe we got people calling in. Maybe that's what that is.
Yeah. No.
Let's see here. We got a few comments on the back. I can't read all of your comments nor read your. Oh wait, no, that's David Ton. That's your okay. He says, I pity anyone who says they have never received divine revelation, but if your ears are closed, you probably can't hear. I have heard from God time and time again.
Yeah. So we need to get Mr. Dave in on this conversation.
Yeah, if like you said, the phone lines are open if you want to call in. We got that going on. The phone line is open. We've got a few minutes, and I'm trying to see the comments here.
Let's do this.
Jeff Robertson actually had a couple questions, and I think he answered it. I think JD answered it without answering it in the comments about giving justification or a meaningful explanation of the laws of logic. You
mean answered it indirectly? Is that?
Yeah.
Answering it without answering it.
Well, because he's.
Anyways.
Yeah. Yes.
What is the question?
The question is, JD's not here anymore. Maybe you can ask him when you go on his show. But
I think we should do this because it's getting late. What we'll do is we'll try to go through on the message feed and answer some of these questions. We'll field this one, and I'm just saying this because I have to pee really bad.
Just back away from the mic like nobody can hear you.
Yeah. So I've been sitting here for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And I drank a cup of coffee and 2 bottles of water, and so I'm out in deep waters at this point.
Deep water? Why do you keep talking about water? Stop it.
Yeah. So let's just fill the one. Was it a question for JD?
It was a question for JD. He's not here anymore. But the question for JD was, can you give a meaningful, given his worldview? This is the question for him. Can you provide a meaningful explanation for the existence of universal objective laws, like laws of logic, and then atomistic, I believe is right. In an atomistic worldview, can't give a meaningful explanation. Right?
Yeah, so I would agree with that statement and the question that's posed, but I think JD gave his answer to the question tonight, as you said, and I think it's sort of like a just so answer, right? That laws are they're properly basic, things that, fundamental starting points. He said, I don't have to justify these sorts of things. I would not attempt to justify them because in doing so, I would be engaging in circular reasoning, and I don't do that, this sort of thing.
So that being said, that's a just so answer is a circular answer.
Yeah, so that's not exactly. Now, I would say that that's the implication, which is what I was trying to point out to JD. But that's what he's trying to avoid. What he's saying is that I start with these properly basic beliefs, and I don't establish them. They establish themselves through their self-verifying character and their consistent application to the realm of human experience. But I in no sense attempt to justify these starting points or these properly basic beliefs because I don't. Because I wouldn't do that because I don't engage in circular reason, this sort of thing. At any rate, I think that would be a faithful representation of what JD was saying. But at any rate, JD is the self-professed super brilliant one, so we'll allow him to speak for himself.
Yeah, super duper brilliant.
So let's put a bow on this thing because we gotta and I appreciate everybody for tuning in, by the way. And we will. I know we got a bunch of questions on the feed. We will answer those in the message board if possible. I don't know.
Anything?
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know the volume of questions is what I was trying to get at. So I don't know.
There wasn't very many. I was hoping that there would be more, but maybe when we get on the TST we can get some reviews over there and
All right, so appreciate everybody. Like and share, subscribe to the channel. To my right over here, we got Mr. Christian H, Wine Sugar. We got Mr. Junior Varsity to my left, the Cookie Crumb Assassin.
That's right.
And of course, Pastor Tommy. What did I say? The Mad Non-Scientist.
Mad non-scientist.
Yeah, notice that that the negation was only applied to the scientist, that I am in fact mad.
Anyway, moving past that, check us out on YouTube, check us out on Facebook, check us out on our website. It's all listed in the links in the description below. Give us a like, give us a share, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check us out every Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Next week we'll have another Vedic presuppositionalist, I believe, is what's planned for next week. So just come check us out.
Yep, G1 Radio out. Sola Deo Gloria.